The door slammed open, and Saren Hale stumbled into the cabin, frost clinging to her coat like a death shroud. Her breath caught, not from the cold, but from the silence. Too silent. Her mother's cough, that awful rattling sound that had haunted their nights, was gone. In its place, her 7-year-old brother Danny sat motionless in the corner, his hollow eyes tracking her movement. On the table, a single piece of bread, 3 days old, rock hard. And in the bedroom doorway, a woman in expensive furs stood like a specter, her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Before we dive into this story of survival, desperation, and the impossible choices we make for love, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Saren's journey reaches across the world. Now, let's begin. The mountains didn't care if you lived or died. Saren had learned that lesson young, watching her father's body carried down from the timberline wrapped in canvas, his face already blue beneath the ice. The mountains took what they wanted and gave nothing back except maybe a view, and you couldn't eat a view. She kicked snow off her boots before stepping fully inside, her fingers numb even through the wool gloves she'd mended so many times they were more patched than original fabric. The trapline had yielded exactly nothing for the third day running. Either the rabbits had moved on or they'd grown smart enough to avoid her amateur snares. Either way, her family was still hungry. Danny? Her brother didn't answer, didn't even blink, just kept staring at her with those big brown eyes that seemed too large for his thin face. He'd stopped talking 2 weeks ago, right around the time the last of the jerky ran out. The doctor in town, back when they could still afford a doctor, had said it was shock, malnutrition. The kind of thing that happened to kids when their bodies started eating themselves from the inside. Where's Mama? Danny's gaze shifted toward the bedroom, slow as molasses in January. The woman in furs stepped aside, revealing the darkened doorway behind her. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and a face that might have been beautiful once before the mountain weather got to it. But her clothes screamed money in a way that felt obscene in their tiny cabin with its newspaper-stuffed walls and smoking stove. "Your mother is resting," the woman said. Her voice was smooth, educated, nothing like the rough mountain drawl Saren had grown up with. "I gave her something for the pain. Laudanum. I hope you don't mind." Saren's jaw clenched. "Who the hell are you?" "Eleanor Vance." The name came out crisp, expecting recognition. When Saren's face stayed blank, something flickered in the woman's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. "Of the Vance Ranch, the largest cattle operation in 3 counties. Never heard of it." "That's because you're dying up here." Eleanor's gaze swept the cabin, taking in the cracked windows stuffed with rags, the empty pantry shelves visible through the kitchen doorway, the way the floorboards had rotted through in the corner where the roof leaked. "Quite literally dying, from what I can see." Saren moved past her into the bedroom, her heart hammering. Her mother lay on the narrow bed, her breathing shallow and wet-sounding. Her face had gone gray, the color of dirty snow, and her lips had a blue tinge that Saren recognized from her father's corpse. The covers barely rose with each breath. "Mama?" She knelt beside the bed, taking her mother's hand. The skin felt paper-thin, cool to the touch. "Mama, can you hear me?" Her mother's eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. A weak sound escaped her throat, something between a word and a sigh. "Pneumonia," Eleanor said from the doorway. "Advanced stage. The laudanum helps, but it's just managing symptoms at this point. She needs a hospital, proper medicine, warmth, food, things I suspect you can't provide." The truth of it hit like a fist to the stomach. Saren had known her mother was sick, had been sick since October, but seeing it laid out so plainly made it real in a way she'd been avoiding. They were out of time, out of options, out of everything except pride, and you couldn't burn pride to keep warm. "What do you want?" Saren's voice came out rough. She stood, squaring her shoulders, even though she was nearly a foot shorter than Eleanor. "People like you don't just show up at cabins like this with free laudanum and medical advice. What's your angle?" Eleanor smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Not warmth exactly, but something like respect. "You're smarter than you look. Good. I have a proposition for you, Miss Hale, one that will save your mother's life, keep your brother fed, and give you a roof over your head that doesn't leak." "I'm listening." "Marry my nephew." The words hung in the air between them, absurd and terrifying all at once. Saren waited for the punchline, the catch, but Eleanor's face stayed serious. "You're joking. I've never been more serious in my life." Eleanor moved into the room, her expensive boots clicking on the rough floorboards. "My nephew Rowan was injured 2 years ago, a riding accident in the high country. His horse went over a ledge during a storm. He survived, but his legs were badly damaged. He can walk, barely, with a cane, but the pain is constant, and it's made him—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Difficult." "Difficult how?" "Angry, bitter. He's driven away 3 nurses, 2 housekeepers, and a physical therapist who came all the way from Chicago. He refuses visitors, barely eats, and spends most of his time locked in his study drinking whiskey and feeling sorry for himself. The ranch is suffering because he won't manage it properly. The hands don't respect him anymore. And I'm getting too old to run it myself." Saren crossed her arms. "Still not hearing why I should care about your family drama. Because I'm offering you a trade." Eleanor's voice hardened, losing its polite veneer. "You marry Rowan, make an honest effort to be his wife, live with him, help manage the household, give the appearance of a proper marriage, and in return, I'll move your mother to the ranch. We have a doctor who visits twice a week. She'll have her own room, warm fires, regular meals, proper medicine. Your brother, too. He'll have food, education, a future that doesn't involve freezing to death in a shack. And what does your nephew get out of this? A reason to stop feeling sorry for himself. Company, whether he wants it or not. And perhaps if you're as stubborn as you seem, someone who won't let him drink himself into an early grave." Eleanor tilted her head, studying Saren like a horse she was considering buying. "You're strong, used to hardship, not prone to theatrics or vapors. Rowan doesn't need another delicate flower wringing her hands over his condition. He needs someone who will look at a crippled man and see a man who can still be useful." The words settled into Sarene's chest like stones. A crippled man, a bitter drunk, a marriage that was really just another form of servitude, except this time she'd be trapped by vows instead of poverty. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to tell this rich woman to take her proposition and her laudanum and get the hell out of their cabin. But then her mother coughed, a wet, rattling sound that seemed to go on forever. And Danny whimpered in the other room, and Saren knew she didn't actually have a choice. Not really. This was survival, same as setting trap lines or chopping wood. You did what you had to do. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" she asked. "About my family. How do I know you won't just take me down to your ranch and then kick them out?" Eleanor reached into her fur coat and pulled out a folded document. "This is a contract, legal and binding. It stipulates that your mother and brother will be cared for on the Vance Ranch for the duration of your marriage to Rowan, with full access to medical care, food, and shelter. If the marriage ends, for any reason, they'll receive a settlement of $5,000 and safe passage to wherever they choose to go. My lawyer in town has a copy. You can verify it before you sign." $5,000. Saren had never seen that much money in her life. Her father had died with $17 in his pocket and a mortgage on a cabin that wasn't worth the nails holding it together. $5,000 could set her mother and Danny up for years, even if the marriage didn't work out. Even if Rowan Vance turned out to be a monster. "I need to think about it. You have until morning." Eleanor tucked the contract back into her coat. "I'll be staying at the boarding house in town. If you agree, we'll leave tomorrow afternoon. There's a justice of the peace who can perform the ceremony at the ranch. Quick and simple. No fuss." "And if I say no?" Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something cold flashed in her eyes. "Then I wish you and your family the best of luck. You'll need it." She left without another word, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft click that sounded terribly final. Saren stood in the bedroom doorway, listening to her mother's labored breathing and Danny's silence, and felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her like snow on a weak roof. She knew what her answer would be. Had known it the moment Eleanor mentioned the doctor, the medicine, the warm room, but that didn't make it easier to swallow. That didn't make the thought of marrying a stranger, a bitter, broken stranger, any less terrifying. That night, she sat by her mother's bed and held her hand, watching the rise and fall of the thin chest beneath the quilts. Sometimes her mother would stir, mumbling words that didn't quite form sentences. Once, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Saren. Baby girl, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're so cold. I'm fine, Mama. No. Her mother's grip tightened with surprising strength. You're always so cold, ever since your daddy died, like you're frozen inside. I'm just tired. Don't let it kill you. Her mother's eyes drifted closed again. Don't let the cold win. But the cold had already won. The cold had been winning for 2 years, slowly eating away at their lives, their hope, their chances. This wasn't about beating the cold anymore. This was about surviving it. And if that meant marrying a man she'd never met, living in a house full of strangers, then so be it. She'd survived worse, probably. Morning came gray and bitter, the kind of dawn that promised nothing but more of the same. Sarah, dressed in her best clothes, a wool dress her mother had made 3 winters ago, faded blue, but still mostly intact, and braided her dark hair back from her face. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the wash basin and barely recognized the woman staring back. 22 years old and already aging out, lines forming around her eyes from squinting against the snow glare, her hands rough and scarred from work. Danny watched her from his corner, his thin arms wrapped around his knees. He still hadn't spoken, hadn't eaten the stale bread she'd left for him last night. I'm going to make this better, she told him, kneeling down to his level. I promise. You're going to have food again, real food, and Mama's going to get medicine. But I need you to be brave for me, okay? Can you do that? He nodded once, slow and mechanical. Good boy. She kissed his forehead, feeling the heat of low fever against her lips. They were running out of time faster than she'd thought. Another week, maybe less, and she'd be burying both of them. The decision wasn't hard anymore. It was inevitable. She walked to town in the early afternoon, her boots crunching through the crusted snow. The boarding house sat on the edge of the settlement, a 2-story structure that looked almost elegant compared to the rough cabins and supply stores that made up the rest of the town. Eleanor was waiting in the parlor, dressed in traveling clothes that probably cost more than Saren's entire cabin. I'll do it, Saren said without preamble. I'll marry your nephew. Eleanor nodded as if she'd never doubted the outcome. Wise choice. Sign here. The contract was exactly as Eleanor had described, cold, legal language that reduced their arrangement to terms and conditions. Saren read it twice, making sure there were no hidden clauses, no tricks. When she was satisfied, she signed her name in careful script at the bottom. Her hand shook slightly, making the letters waver. Excellent. Eleanor produced a small leather purse and counted out $20 in bills for immediate expenses. Get your mother and brother ready to travel. My men will bring a wagon to collect them this evening. You'll come with me now. Now? The sooner we get this done, the sooner your family receives proper care. Eleanor's tone left no room for argument. Unless you've changed your mind. Serene thought of her mother's gray face, Danny's hollow eyes. No, I haven't changed my mind. They traveled in a carriage that must have cost a small fortune, pulled by 2 massive horses that looked like they'd never missed a meal in their lives. The interior was lined with leather and velvet, warmer than any space Saren had occupied in months. She sat rigid on the bench seat, acutely aware of how out of place she was, how her worn dress and rough hands looked against the luxury surrounding her. Eleanor sat across from her, apparently content with silence. After an hour of watching the mountains roll past the window, Saren couldn't take it anymore. Tell me about him, your nephew. What's he really like? Eleanor considered the question for a long moment. Before the accident, Rowan was extraordinary, fearless. He could track anything that moved, survived a winter alone in the high country when he was 19 just to prove he could. The ranch hands would have followed him into hell if he asked. He had this way of making you believe anything was possible. And after? After, he's a ghost wearing Rowan's face. The pain is part of it. The doctors say his legs will never fully heal, that he'll deal with chronic pain for the rest of his life. But it's more than that. He lost himself up on that mountain, and he can't seem to find his way back. You really think marrying him off to a stranger is going to fix that? Eleanor's laugh was sharp and humorless. No, but I think it might stop him from putting a bullet in his head, which is more than I can say for the current situation. At the very least, you'll give him something to focus on besides his own misery. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll remind him that there are things worth living for. No pressure, then. Oh, there's plenty of pressure, Miss Hale. Make no mistake, I'm not doing this out of charity. The Vance Ranch is my legacy, and I need Rowan functional enough to run it properly when I'm gone. If you can help make that happen, wonderful. If not, she shrugged. Well, at least your family will be taken care of. They arrived at the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered fields in shades of orange and pink. The main house rose against the mountains like something out of a storybook. 3 stories of white-painted wood and stone with wide porches and tall windows that glowed with lamplight. Barns and outbuildings sprawled around it, everything neat and well-maintained despite the harsh winter. Cattle dotted the distant fields, dark shapes against the snow. It was the kind of wealth Saren had only imagined. The kind that felt obscene when she thought about her mother dying in a one-room cabin with newspaper stuffed in the walls. "Home sweet home," Eleanor said dryly. "Come, let's get this over with." Inside, the house was even more impressive. High ceilings, polished wood floors, furniture that looked like it belonged in a catalog. A fire roared in a massive stone fireplace, throwing heat that Saren felt like a physical force after so many months of cold. Staff appeared from various doorways. A housekeeper in a crisp apron, a couple of ranch hands tracking snow on their boots, a cook wiping flour-dusted hands on her skirts. They all stopped and stared at Saren with varying degrees of curiosity and confusion. "This is Miss Saren Hale," Eleanor announced. "She'll be marrying Rowan this evening. See that the guest room is prepared for her. And someone fetch Justice Miller from town. Tell him it's urgent." The staff exchanged glances, but didn't question the orders. They scattered to their tasks, leaving Saren standing in the grand entryway feeling like an intruder. "Where is he?" Saren asked. "Your nephew. Upstairs. In his study. Where he always is." Eleanor sighed, removing her fur coat and handing it to the housekeeper. "I should warn you, he doesn't know about this arrangement. I thought it best to present him with a fait accompli rather than give him time to refuse." Saren's stomach dropped. "You're telling me he doesn't even know I exist?" "He knows I've been looking for a solution to his situation. He just doesn't know I found one, or what it looks like." Eleanor started up the stairs, her hand trailing along the polished banister. "Come. You might as well meet him before the ceremony. Get the worst of it over with." Every instinct screamed at Saren to run, to get back in that carriage and race back to her cabin before this went any further. But she thought of the wagon that would already be on its way to collect her mother and Danny, thought of the warm room and the doctor and the food, and she forced her feet to climb the stairs. The study was at the end of a long hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced people who all shared variations of the same sharp features. Eleanor knocked once, perfunctory, then opened the door without waiting for a response. The room beyond was dark despite the early evening hour, lit only by the dying fire in the grate. It smelled of whiskey and old smoke and something else, pain maybe, or despair. Saren's eyes adjusted slowly, picking out details. Bookshelves covering one wall, a massive desk covered in papers, and in a leather chair by the fire, a man. He didn't look up when they entered, just sat there staring into the flames, one hand wrapped around a glass of amber liquid, the other gripping a cane propped against the chair arm. His dark hair needed cutting, falling into his eyes. His jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He wore a shirt that might have been white once but had gone gray from repeated wear, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. "Go away, Eleanor," he said without looking. His voice was rough, unused, like gravel grinding together. "I'm not in the mood for one of your lectures." "I'm not here to lecture you, Rowan. I'm here to introduce you to your future wife." That got his attention. His head snapped up, eyes finding Eleanor first and then sliding to Saren. They were an unsettling shade of gray-green, the color of a winter forest, and they looked at her with such open contempt that she actually took a step back. "My what?" "Your wife." Eleanor moved into the room, casual as if discussing the weather. "This is Saren Hale. You'll be married this evening. Justice Miller is on his way." Rowan stared at his aunt for a long moment, then started laughing. It was an awful sound, sharp and bitter, with no humor in it at all. "You finally lost your mind. Wonderful. I always wondered when that would happen. I'm perfectly sane, and you know it. Miss Hale has agreed to marry you in exchange for medical care for her family. It's a business arrangement, nothing more. You get a wife to manage the household and provide companionship. She gets security and resources for her mother and brother. Everyone wins. Everyone except me." Rowan turned those cold eyes back to Saren. "Let me guess. You're from one of those falling apart cabins up in the high country. Starving, desperate. So desperate you'll agree to marry a cripple you've never met just to save your own skin. The word cripple came out like a curse, heavy with self-loathing. Saren felt her jaw clench, anger rising to meet his contempt. Actually, she said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest, I agreed to marry an asshole I've never met to save my mother's life. The fact that you can't walk properly is just a bonus. Makes you easier to outrun when you get on my nerves. Silence dropped over the room like a blanket. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Rowan's expression shifted from contempt to something that might have been surprise, then hardened into something worse. Get out, he said quietly. Rowan, I said get out! He hurled the whiskey glass at the fireplace, where it shattered against the stone in a spray of glass and liquor. The flames jumped higher for a moment, fed by the alcohol. I don't need your charity, Eleanor. And I sure as hell don't need some mountain rat playing nursemaid because you bribed her into it. Saren felt the words hit like slaps, each one designed to wound. Mountain rat, charity case, nursemaid. She'd been called worse. Poverty stripped away most illusions about people's kindness, but it still stung coming from someone who was supposed to be her future husband. You know what? She stepped forward, ignoring Eleanor's warning hand on her arm. You're right. I am desperate. My mother's dying of pneumonia because we can't afford medicine. My 7-year-old brother hasn't spoken in 2 weeks because he's starving. Our cabin has holes in the roof and newspaper in the walls, and the only reason we haven't frozen to death yet is sheer stubbornness. So yeah, I'm marrying you for the money and the security and the doctor, but at least I'm honest about it. At least I'm not sitting in an expensive study, drinking expensive whiskey, feeling sorry for myself while pretending it's somehow noble. Rowan's hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles going white. For a moment, Saren thought he might actually try to stand, to come after her, but he stayed seated. Whether from pride or pain, she couldn't tell. You don't know anything about me, he said, his voice dangerously soft. I know you're breathing. I know you have a roof over your head and food on your table. I know you're not watching your family die by inches because you can't afford firewood. She took another step closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray-green eyes, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath. So, forgive me if I don't have a lot of sympathy for your suffering. We're all suffering. At least you get to do it somewhere warm. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something cutting, something that would put her back in her place. But whatever he saw on her face made him hesitate, made him actually look at her instead of through her. This is insane, he said finally, but some of the heat had gone out of his voice. Probably, Saren agreed, but I'm doing it anyway, and so are you. Unless you want to explain to your aunt why you'd rather drink yourself to death than make an honest effort to function like a human being. Eleanor cleared her throat. Justice Miller will be here within the hour. I suggest you both use that time to make yourselves presentable. Rowan, put on a clean shirt. Saren, come with me. We'll find you something more suitable to wear. She ushered Saren out of the study before either of them could protest. In the hallway, with the door safely closed behind them, Eleanor actually smiled. Well, she said, that went better than expected. Better? Saren stared at her. He threw a glass at the fireplace. Yes, but he didn't throw it at you, and he didn't refuse outright, which means he's at least considering it. Trust me, with Rowan, that counts as progress. Eleanor started down the hallway, expecting Saren to follow. Come, let's get you ready, and try not to look quite so terrified. It's just a wedding, not an execution. Saren wasn't so sure there was a difference. The guest room Eleanor led her to was bigger than her entire cabin had been, with a 4-poster bed covered in quilts that looked hand-stitched and expensive. A fire burned in the small fireplace, and there was even a private washroom with running water. Luxury beyond anything Serene had imagined. A dress had been laid out on the bed, deep green wool with mother-of-pearl buttons, simple but well-made. Saren touched it hesitantly, half expecting it to disappear like smoke. It was mine 30 years ago, Eleanor said from the doorway. We're about the same height. It should fit well enough. There are undergarments in the wardrobe. Take your time. I'll send someone to collect you when Justice Miller arrives. She left Saren alone with the dress and the warm room and the crushing weight of what she was about to do. Getting married. To a man who hated her on sight. To a bitter drunk who couldn't even stand without a cane. She thought about her mother's gray face, Danny's hollow eyes, and forced herself to pick up the dress. It fit better than it had any right to, hugging her waist and falling in clean lines to her ankles. The color brought out the brown in her eyes, made her dark hair look almost glossy in the firelight. She looked like a different person. Not beautiful, exactly. The mountains had carved too much hardness into her features for beauty. But presentable. Respectable. Like someone who belonged in a house like this. It felt like a lie. A knock on the door made her jump. The housekeeper, a woman named Margaret, who'd been polite but distant, poked her head in. "Justice Miller is here, miss. They're waiting in the parlor." This was it, the point of no return. Saren took a breath that felt too shallow, too quick, and followed Margaret downstairs. The parlor had been hastily arranged for a wedding. Candles lit, a few ranch hands gathered as witnesses, Justice Miller standing by the fireplace with a worn Bible in his hands. He was an older man, weathered and practical-looking, the kind who probably performed weddings and funerals with equal efficiency. And there was Rowan. He'd changed into a clean shirt and dark jacket that probably looked impressive on a man who could stand properly. But he was leaning heavily on his cane. His weight shifted awkwardly to one side, and his face was pale beneath the stubble. Whether from pain or anger or something else, Saren couldn't tell. He didn't look at her when she entered, just kept his eyes fixed on some point past Justice Miller's shoulder, his jaw clenched tight. "This is a mistake," a voice whispered in Saren's head. "You still have time to run." But she didn't run. She walked across the parlor on legs that felt disconnected from her body and took her place beside Rowan. He smelled like soap and whiskey, and up close she could see the lines of pain etched around his eyes, the way his hand trembled slightly on the cane. Justice Miller cleared his throat. "Well then, let's begin. Dearly beloved." "Skip to the vows," Rowan interrupted. "Let's not pretend this is anything but a transaction." Justice Miller's eyebrows rose, but he nodded and flipped ahead in his Bible. "Very well. Do you, Rowan James Vance, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" A pause that stretched too long. Saren felt her heart hammering against her ribs. He's going to refuse, she thought. He's going to call this whole thing off, and my mother is going to die, and Danny is going to starve, and I do, Rowan said. The words came out flat, emotionless, like he was agreeing to sign a contract, which Saren supposed he was. And do you, Saren, Justice Miller paused, glancing at his notes, Saren Ann Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband. She looked at Rowan's profile, at the hard line of his jaw, the bitter set of his mouth. She thought about her mother's labored breathing, about Danny's silence, about the trap lines that had come up empty for 3 days running. She thought about cold and hunger and the slow death of hope. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Rowan turned to look at her for the first time since she'd entered the room. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in those gray-green eyes. Resentment, maybe, or resignation. Definitely not affection. We can skip that part, he said. Saren felt relief and humiliation wash over her in equal measure. Fine by me. Justice Miller looked between them with an expression that suggested he'd seen plenty of reluctant weddings, but this one might take the prize. Still, he produced a marriage certificate and had them both sign it, along with Eleanor and 2 ranch hands as witnesses. Just like that, it was done. Saren Hale was now Saren Vance, married to a man who could barely look at her. Eleanor produced glasses of champagne for a toast, but the celebration was perfunctory at best. The ranch hands mumbled congratulations that sounded more like condolences. Rowan drained his glass in one swallow and immediately refilled it from the bottle Eleanor had left on the side table. Your family should arrive within the hour, Eleanor told Saren. I've had rooms prepared for them in the East Wing. The doctor will examine your mother first thing in the morning. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, but Saren didn't know what else to say. Eleanor had bought her family's lives with a marriage contract and a promise of resources. The debt felt crushing. Don't thank me yet. Eleanor's smile was thin. You haven't started earning your keep. Rowan, show your wife to her room. She can find her own way. He was already heading for the door, his gait uneven but determined, the cane thumping against the floor with each step. Rowan, something in Eleanor's voice made him stop. made him turn back with an expression that could have curdled milk. "Show your wife to her room." The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Saren saw the muscles in Rowan's jaw work, saw his hand tighten on the cane until his knuckles went white. For a moment she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd tell his aunt exactly where she could shove her orders. Instead, he jerked his head toward the stairs. "Follow me." He didn't wait to see if she complied, just started toward the staircase with that awkward, limping gait that was somehow worse to watch, because you could tell it cost him. Pride and pain fighting for dominance with every step. Saren followed, acutely aware of the ranch hands watching, of Eleanor's calculating gaze tracking their progress. The stairs were clearly agony for him. He took them one at a time, his weight on the cane and the banister, his breathing harsh by the time they reached the second floor. Saren wanted to offer help, but suspected that would go over about as well as a punch to the face. He led her down a hallway different from the one Eleanor had used earlier, this one darker. The portraits on the walls less formal, family photos, hunting trophies, the accumulated history of the Vance line. He stopped at a door near the end and pushed it open. "This was my mother's room," he said without looking at her. "It connects to mine through that door." He pointed to a door on the far wall. "Keep it locked. I'll do the same. With any luck, we can go days without seeing each other." Saren stepped into the room, another space of impossible luxury, with a canopy bed and a window seat overlooking the snow-covered fields. It was beautiful and cold and felt nothing like home. "Anything else I should know?" she asked, turning back to find him still in the doorway. "Any other rules for this arrangement? Stay out of my way. Don't expect anything from me. And for God's sake, don't try to fix me. I'm not some project for you to work on because you're bored. Wouldn't dream of it." Saren crossed her arms. "You've made it very clear you're perfectly happy being miserable." His eyes flashed. "You don't know anything about what I—" "Yeah, you mentioned that already. You don't know me, I don't know you. We're strangers playing house for money. I get it." She moved closer to the door, close enough to see the gray shadows under his eyes, the way pain had carved deep lines into his face. "But you should know something. I didn't agree to this arrangement because I had better options. I agreed because it was this or watch my family die. So I'm going to make the best of it, even if you're determined to make that as difficult as possible. We don't have to like each other. We don't even have to talk. But we're stuck together now, so we might as well try not to make each other completely miserable." She didn't wait for a response, just stepped back and closed the door in his face, hearing the lock click into place with a finality that echoed through the empty room. Outside, she heard him stand there for a moment longer. Then came the uneven thump of his cane as he walked away. Saren sank onto the bed, still wearing Eleanor's green dress, and finally let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just done. She was married to a man who hated her, living in a house full of strangers, bound by a contract that felt more like a prison sentence than a partnership. But her mother would get medicine, Danny would get food, they would be warm and safe and cared for. That was what mattered. That was what she'd keep telling herself, night after night in this beautiful cold room, until maybe she started to believe it. Outside her window, snow began to fall again, silent and relentless, covering everything in white. Saren woke to the sound of voices in the hallway, low, urgent, unfamiliar. For a moment she didn't know where she was, her mind still caught in the dream of her old cabin, the familiar creaks and drafts. Then she remembered the wedding, the contract, the man who'd rather drink himself to death than look at her. She threw off the heavy quilts and moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. Two women were talking, their voices carrying that particular pitch of gossip dressed up as concern. "Never seen anything like it. A wedding with no celebration, no family, just that poor mountain girl looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Can you blame her? Married to a cripple who barely acknowledges she exists. Eleanor's lost her mind if she thinks this will fix anything. Hush, she'll hear you." Saren stepped back from the door, her jaw tight. So that was how it would be. The staff already pitying her, already writing off the marriage as another of Eleanor's failed attempts to salvage her nephew. She'd dealt with pity before, had seen it in the eyes of townspeople when her father died, when her mother got sick, when it became clear they were slowly starving. Pity was just contempt wearing a softer mask. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, the worn blue dress feeling more honest than Eleanor's expensive green wool. When she opened the door, the hallway was empty. Cowards. Downstairs, she found the kitchen through sheer determination and the smell of coffee. The cook, a round woman named Betty, who'd been introduced briefly at the wedding, looked up from a massive stove with surprise. "Mrs. Vance, you should have rung. I'd have brought breakfast to your room." Mrs. Vance. The name felt like a costume that didn't fit right. "I can come to the kitchen just fine. Where's my family?" "East Wing, like Mrs. Eleanor said. The doctor's with your mama now. Been there since dawn." Betty poured coffee without asking, set it in front of Serene with a plate of biscuits that were still warm. "Your brother's in the room next to hers. Haven't seen him come out yet." Serene grabbed the coffee and a biscuit and headed for the East Wing without another word. The house was a maze of hallways and rooms, but she followed the sound of voices until she found the right door. It was open. Inside, her mother lay in a bed 3 times the size of the one in their cabin, propped up on pillows, while a gray-haired man in spectacles listened to her chest with a stethoscope. "Mama?" Her mother's eyes opened, clearer than they'd been in weeks. "Serene, baby, you look different." "I'm fine." She moved to the bedside, taking her mother's hand. The skin still felt thin, fragile, but warmer than yesterday. "How are you feeling?" "Like I can breathe." Her mother's smile was weak but genuine. "This nice doctor says I've got a fighting chance if I rest and take the medicine he's giving me." The doctor straightened, removing the stethoscope. "Dr. Harrison, your mother has advanced pneumonia, but it's not too late for treatment. I'm prescribing a regimen of antibiotics and bed rest. She'll need to stay warm, eat regular meals, and avoid any physical exertion for at least a month. After that, we'll reassess." A month. 4 weeks ago, Serene had thought her mother wouldn't last 4 more days. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank Mrs. Eleanor. She's the one paying my fees." He packed his instruments into a leather bag. "I'll check on her again tomorrow. Make sure she takes all the medicine, even when she starts feeling better. Pneumonia has a nasty habit of coming back if you don't finish the treatment." After he left, Serene sat with her mother, just holding her hand and listening to her breathe. The sound was still wet, still labored, but better. Definitely better. "You married him," her mother said after a while. "The nephew." "I did." "Is he kind?" Serene thought about Rowan's contempt, the glass shattering against the fireplace, the way he'd told her to stay out of his way like she was some kind of pest. "He's complicated." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got right now." Serene squeezed her mother's hand. "But you're safe. You and Danny both. That's what matters." "What about you?" The question hung in the air. Serene didn't have an answer for it, so she changed the subject. "Where's Danny?" "Next room. He still won't talk, but he ate breakfast. Eggs and toast and bacon. I watched him through the door. He ate every bite." That was something. That was progress. Serene kissed her mother's forehead and went to find her brother. Danny's room was smaller but still nice, with a window overlooking the barns. He sat on the floor in the corner, his usual position, but he was playing with something. A carved wooden horse, smooth and detailed, the kind of toy that probably costs more than their cabin's monthly mortgage. "Hey, little man." He looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks, his eyes didn't look quite so hollow. He held up the horse, showing her. "That's beautiful. Where'd you get it?" He pointed toward the door, then made a gesture she didn't understand. She knelt beside him, patient. Danny used to talk nonstop, filling their cabin with chatter about everything and nothing. The silence still felt wrong, like a part of him had gone missing. "Someone gave it to you?" He nodded. "Who?" He pointed again, more insistent this time, and Serene realized he was pointing up, upstairs, where Rowan's study was. "The man I married? He gave you this?" Another nod. That didn't make sense. Rowan had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with any of them, had locked himself in his study with his whiskey and his bitterness. Why would he give Danny a toy? "Did you see him?" Danny shook his head, then mimed setting something down and walking away. He'd left it outside the door. A gift delivered in secret, like Rowan couldn't bear to be thanked for it. Something shifted in Serene's chest, a small crack in the wall of resentment she'd been building. It didn't change anything. Rowan was still an asshole who'd made it clear he resented her existence. But it was something, a gesture toward the people she loved, even if he couldn't extend the same courtesy to her. "Well," she said, ruffling Danny's hair. "That was nice of him. What do you say next time you see him? Danny made the shape of words with his mouth, but no sound came out. She could see him trying, could see the frustration cross his thin face when nothing happened. It's okay. You'll talk when you're ready. No rush. She sat with him for a while, watching him play with the horse, galloping it across the floorboards in elaborate imaginary adventures. It was the most animated she'd seen him in weeks. The rest of the morning passed in a strange limbo. Siren explored the house, mapping out the rooms and hallways, nodding politely to staff, who looked at her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. She found the library, 2 stories of books that probably cost more than her family had earned in their entire lives. She found the dining room, formal and cold. She found a sitting room with a piano that looked like it hadn't been played in years, dust coating the keys. What she didn't find was Rowan. He'd apparently perfected the art of being invisible in his own house. The staff moved around his absence like water around a stone, mentioning him in oblique terms. Mr. Vance takes his meals in his study. Mr. Vance doesn't come down before noon. Mr. Vance prefers not to be disturbed. By mid-afternoon, Saren's patience was wearing thin. She'd agreed to this marriage, was living in this house, wearing the title of Mrs. Vance like an ill-fitting coat. The least he could do was acknowledge her existence beyond a locked door and a wooden horse left for her brother. She climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, found the hallway with the portraits, and walked straight to his study. She didn't bother knocking, just turned the handle, unlocked, apparently he wasn't expecting visitors, and walked in. Rowan was at his desk, papers spread before him, a ledger open to a page of numbers. He looked up with an expression that went from surprise to annoyance in the space of a heartbeat. I thought I made it clear that you wanted to be left alone. Yeah, I got that message loud and clear. Saren closed the door behind her and leaned against it. But we need to talk. No, we don't. Yes, we do. Because this... She gestured between them at the space and silence and mutual resentment isn't sustainable. We're married. We live in the same house. And whether you like it or not, people are watching to see how this plays out. Let them watch. He turned back to his ledger, dismissing her. I didn't ask for an audience. You didn't ask for a wife either, but here we are. She moved closer to the desk, refusing to be ignored. Look, I'm not expecting us to be friends. I'm not even expecting us to like each other. But we could at least try to be civil, have dinner together once in a while, acknowledge each other when we pass in the hallway. Basic human decency. I'm not good company, I've noticed. But you gave Danny a toy horse, so you're capable of kindness when you want to be. Why not extend some of that to me? His jaw tightened. That was different. Why? Because he's a kid? Because he didn't ask to be here? She leaned on the desk, forcing him to look at her. Neither did I, Rowan. I'm here because your aunt made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Just like you're stuck with me because she backed you into a corner. We're both trapped, so we might as well make the cage a little less miserable. For a long moment, he just stared at her. His eyes were bloodshot, she noticed. Dark circles underneath that suggested he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled, like he'd slept in it. Or hadn't slept at all. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Dinner, tonight. In the dining room, not your study. 1 hour where we sit across from each other and pretend to be people instead of problems. Think you can manage that? And if I refuse, then I'll come back tomorrow and ask again, and the day after that, and the day after that. I can be very persistent when I want something. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. I'm starting to see that. So, dinner? He sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. Fine, dinner, but don't expect conversation. I'm out of practice. I'll do enough talking for both of us. 7 o'clock? 6:30. I eat early. 6:30 it is. She straightened, feeling like she'd won something small but significant. And Rowan, thank you, for the horse. Danny loves it. She left before he could respond, closing the door quietly behind her. In the hallway, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It wasn't much, one dinner grudgingly agreed to, but it was a start. A crack in the wall he'd built around himself. The rest of the afternoon dragged. Saren checked on her mother, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. She played with Danny, building elaborate adventures with the wooden horse. She ate lunch in the kitchen with Betty, who was warming up to her now that it was clear Saren wasn't above spending time with the staff. You should know, Betty said, sliding a plate of cold roast beef and bread across the table. Mr. Rowan wasn't always like this. Before the accident, he was different. How different? Kind. Funny, even. He'd come down to the kitchen and steal cookies while they were cooling, charm me into making his favorites. The ranch hands loved him. He worked alongside them, never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. Betty's expression turned sad. The accident changed him. Not just his legs. Something inside broke too. What happened? Eleanor mentioned a fall, but she didn't give details. He was tracking a mountain lion that had been killing cattle. Went up into the high country during a storm, typical Rowan, too stubborn to wait for better weather. His horse spooked, went over a ledge. Rowan fell maybe 30 feet onto rocks. They found him 2 days later, half frozen, his legs crushed. The doctor said it was a miracle he survived it all. Surin tried to imagine it. The fall, the impact, lying there in the cold knowing you might die before anyone found you. The kind of pain that didn't just hurt your body, but broke something fundamental in your sense of who you were. He can still walk, she said. Barely, and it costs him every time. The pain never stops, the doctor says. There's damage to the nerves, the bones that didn't set quite right. He hides it well, but you can see it if you watch close. Every step is agony. That explained the whiskey, the bitterness, the way he'd locked himself away from the world. He was living in constant pain with no relief in sight, watching himself become a shadow of who he'd been. It didn't excuse his behavior, but it made it make more sense. He needs something to look forward to, Betty said. Something beyond just managing the pain day to day. Maybe you can give him that. I wouldn't know where to start. Start with dinner. See where it goes from there. At 6:30 sharp, Sarin made her way to the dining room. The table had been set for two, candles lit despite the daylight still filtering through the windows. It felt absurdly formal for what was essentially two strangers eating in uncomfortable silence, but she appreciated the effort. Rowan arrived 3 minutes late, his gait slow and unsteady. He'd changed into clean clothes, black pants and a white shirt that looked freshly pressed, and he'd shaved. The effort felt significant, like he was trying even if he didn't want to admit it. They sat at opposite ends of the long table, a ridiculous distance between them. This is stupid, Sarin said. I can't even hear you from here. That was rather the point. Well, it's a stupid point. She picked up her plate and silverware and moved to the chair directly across from him. There. Much better. He looked like he wanted to argue, but Betty appeared with the first course, soup that smelled like heaven, rich and savory, with chunks of vegetables and beef. Sarin's stomach growled audibly. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until food appeared. They ate in silence for several minutes. The soup was incredible, better than anything Sarin had tasted in her life. She had to consciously slow down, resist the urge to inhale it like someone might take it away. The horse, she said finally, breaking the quiet. Where'd you get it? Carved it myself, years ago when I was laid up after breaking my arm. Seemed like something a kid might like. He loves it. Hasn't put it down since he found it. Rowan nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. How's your mother? Better. The medicine is helping. The doctor says if she rests and eats properly, she might fully recover. Good. He took a drink of water. Water, she noticed, not whiskey. Another small concession. And you? How are you settling in? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected stony silence or terse answers, not actual curiosity about her well-being. It's strange. All this space, all this warmth. I keep waiting for it to disappear. It won't. Eleanor's many things, but she keeps her word. Unlike some people. His eyes finally met hers, sharp and defensive. If you have something to say, say it. You promised to have dinner with me, and you're barely talking. That's not really keeping your word. I'm here, aren't I? Physically, but you're 1,000 miles away in your head. She set down her spoon, leaning forward. Look, I get it. You didn't want this. You're in pain and you're angry, and you'd rather be alone with your whiskey. But I'm here anyway, and we might as well make an effort. So tell me something, anything. What did you do before the accident? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I ran the ranch, managed the herds, the land, the business side. I knew every acre, every trail, could track anything that moved and tell you what it had for breakfast. I was good at it. What happened to the ranch after you got hurt? Eleanor took over. She's competent, but she's old. The hands know it. They test her, push boundaries. We've lost cattle to poor management, lost good workers who didn't want to take orders from an old woman. The place is falling apart slowly, and there's nothing I can do about it. The bitterness in his voice was corrosive. Saren could hear it eating at him. The loss of purpose may be worse than the loss of mobility. "Why can't you do anything about it?" she asked. "Because I can barely walk, let alone ride out to check fence lines or drive cattle. The men don't respect me anymore. They see the cane, the limp, and they see weakness. A crippled man can't run a ranch." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." He stared at her. "Excuse me? You heard me? It's stupid. Your legs are damaged, not your brain. You know this land, you know the business, you know what needs to be done. So what if you can't ride? You can still give orders, make decisions, manage the operation, unless you're saying Eleanor's doing it wrong because she's old and female, in which case you're not just bitter, you're a hypocrite." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "Because it sounds like you've decided that since you can't do things exactly the way you used to, there's no point in doing them at all." "That's not pain talking, Rowan. That's self-pity." She watched anger flash across his face, watched his hand tighten on the table edge. For a moment she thought he'd get up and leave, end the dinner right there. Instead, he took a breath. "You don't know what it's like," he said quietly, "to lose everything that made you who you were." "You're right, I don't, but I know what it's like to watch people give up. My father did it after the first bad winter, stopped trying to make the cabin work, stopped planning for the future. He was just going through the motions until the mountain killed him, and I'll be damned if I watch you do the same thing." "Why do you care?" Good question. Saren wasn't entirely sure herself. Maybe because she'd seen too much death and giving up already. Maybe because somewhere under the bitterness and pain, she could see echoes of the man Betty had described, the one who'd been kind and capable and alive. "Because you gave my brother a toy horse," she said finally. "Because you're keeping your word about my family even though you hate me. Because I think there's still something worth saving under all that anger, and it seems like a waste to let it die just because things got hard." Betty appeared with the main course, roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, everything seasoned perfectly. They ate in silence again, but it felt different this time, less hostile, more contemplative. "The men won't listen to me," Rowan said after a while. "I've tried. They nod and agree to my face, then do whatever they want. So make them listen. Find the leader, the one the others follow, and get him on your side, then the rest will fall in line." It's not that simple. It never is. But it's better than sitting in your study drinking yourself stupid and pretending you don't care. He almost smiled. Almost. "You're very blunt. Mountain living doesn't leave much room for politeness. You say what you mean or you freeze to death while you're dancing around the point." "Fair enough." He pushed food around his plate, thinking. "There's a foreman, Jack Brennan. Good man, been with the ranch for 20 years. He respected me before the accident. Maybe I could start there." "Sounds like a plan." "Don't get your hopes up. He might tell me to go to hell. Then you try someone else. You keep trying until something works." She met his eyes across the table. "That's what survival looks like, Rowan. You don't give up just because the first attempt fails." They finished dinner with something approaching actual conversation, stilted and awkward, but real. Rowan told her about the ranch, the layout of the land, the challenges of running a cattle operation in harsh mountain winters. Saren talked about the trap lines, about learning to survive with nothing, about the difference between being poor and being desperate. When they were done, Rowan stood slowly, his face tightening with the effort. "Same time tomorrow?" Saren asked. He paused, clearly surprised. "You want to do this again? Unless you'd rather go back to eating alone in your study." "I wouldn't say I enjoyed this." "But you didn't hate it either. I can see it on your face. You're less miserable than you were this morning. So yeah, same time tomorrow. And maybe the day after that. Eventually, you might even start looking forward to it. Don't push your luck. You're pushing my luck is how I got this far." She stood as well, gathering her plate. "Good night, Rowan." "Good night." She made it to the doorway before his voice stopped her. "Saren?" She turned back. "Thank you. For dinner. For pushing." It wasn't much, but coming from him, it felt like a lot. "You're welcome." The next few days fell into a pattern. Saren spent her mornings with her mother and Danny, watching them grow stronger with proper food and medicine. The doctor's visits became shorter, more optimistic. Her mother's cough eased. Color returned to Danny's face. He still didn't talk, but he'd started exploring the ranch with the wooden horse, creating elaborate worlds in the barns and fields. Afternoons, Saren explored. She walked the ranch with one of the hands, a young guy named Tom who seemed bemused by the new Mrs. Vance's interest in fence lines and cattle movements. She learned the layout, the rhythm of the operation, where things worked and where they were falling apart. Eleanor watched her with sharp, calculating eyes, but said nothing. Just observed, waiting to see what Saren would do with her newfound position. Evenings were dinner with Rowan. Every night at 6:30, they sat across from each other and tried to be human. It got easier. The silences grew less awkward. He started asking questions about her day, and she'd tell him what she'd seen, what problems she'd noticed. He'd explain the history, the context, the reasons things were done certain ways. "The north fence is falling apart," she said one night, a week into the arrangement. "I know, we don't have the manpower to fix it right now." "Why not?" "You've got a dozen hands who spend half their time standing around smoking. They're waiting for spring work, branding, moving cattle to summer pasture, fixing fence is grunt work beneath them." "That's ridiculous. Work is work." Rowan shrugged. "Take it up with Brennan. He sets the work schedules." "Maybe I will." That got his attention. "You're serious?" "Why wouldn't I be? The fence needs fixing. You've got men sitting idle. Seems straightforward to me." "Saren, these are ranch hands, rough men who don't take kindly to being told what to do by a woman, especially one who doesn't know cattle from chickens." "Then I'll learn the difference, and I'll tell them anyway." She took a drink of water, unless you'd rather do it yourself. The challenge hung between them. She watched him process it, watched the war play out on his face. Pride versus pain, the desire to reclaim his authority versus the fear of failure. "I'll talk to Brennan," he said finally. "Tomorrow." "Want company?" "No. I'm coming anyway." His expression suggested he wanted to argue, but he just sighed. "You're impossible. I prefer persistent." The next morning, Saren found Rowan in the barn, leaning against a stall door and talking to a weathered man with iron gray hair and a face like old leather. Jack Brennan, she assumed. The foreman. They both looked up when she approached, Brennan's expression going carefully neutral. "Mrs. Vance," he said, touching his hat brim. "Mr. Brennan, don't let me interrupt. I'm just here to listen." Rowan shot her a look that clearly said this wasn't what they'd agreed to, but he didn't send her away. Instead, he turned back to Brennan. "The north fence," he said. "It needs work before spring. I want a crew on it next week." Brennan frowned. "Most of the boys are occupied with winter maintenance. Can't spare them for fence work right now." "Then reassign them. The fence is a priority." "With respect, Mr. Vance, Mrs. Eleanor already approved the current work schedule. If you want to change it, you'll need to take it up with her." It was a polite dismissal, and they all knew it. Brennan was using Eleanor as a shield, refusing to acknowledge Rowan's authority without directly defying him. Saren watched Rowan's jaw tighten, watched him start to retreat into familiar bitterness. Before he could respond, she stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, how long have you worked for the Vances?" He looked surprised at the question. 22 years, ma'am." "So you remember what this ranch was like before the accident, when Rowan was running things?" "I do. And how's it doing now, honestly?" Brennan's gaze flicked to Rowan, uncertain. "It's managing." "That's not what I asked. Is this ranch better, worse, or the same as it was 2 years ago?" A long pause. Then, "Worse. We've lost ground, lost cattle, lost good men who didn't want to stick around through the decline." "And you think that's because Eleanor's in charge? Or because the man who actually knows this land has decided he's too broken to do anything about it?" "Saren," Rowan's voice held a warning. She ignored him. "Because, from where I'm standing, Mr. Brennan, you're using Mrs. Eleanor as an excuse not to follow orders from a man who knows this ranch better than anyone alive. And that's not respect, that's cowardice." Brennan's face darkened. "You've been here a week. You don't know." "I know that Rowan Vance built this operation into something impressive before his accident. I know he's still the same person, same knowledge, same capability. The only thing that's changed is his legs. And last I checked, you don't run a ranch with your legs. You run it with your brain and your will, both of which he still has." The barn had gone quiet. Other hands had stopped their work, listening. You want respect? Saren continued, looking at Rowan now. Then stop asking for it and take it. You know what needs to be done. Give the order and make it stick. Rowan met her gaze, and something shifted in his expression. The uncertainty faded, replaced by something harder, more familiar. The man he'd been before the mountain tried to kill him. He turned to Brennan. You'll put a crew on the north fence starting Monday. 4 men, minimum. They'll work until it's done properly. If anyone has a problem with that, they can find employment elsewhere. Are we clear? Brennan stood there for a moment, measuring. Then he nodded slowly. Crystal clear, Mr. Vance. I'll see it done. Good. And Brennan? From now on, when I give an order, you follow it. Eleanor's in charge of the household and the books. I'm in charge of the ranch operations. That's how it's going to be. Understood, sir. After Brennan left, Rowan turned to Saren with an expression caught between gratitude and annoyance. That was necessary. He was never going to respect you if you kept treating Eleanor's authority as more important than your own. You basically called him a coward in front of his crew. Was I wrong? No, but it was risky. He could have told me to go to hell. But he didn't. Because somewhere under all that testing, he still respects you. He just needed to remember why. She started walking toward the barn exit. You coming? I want to check on my mother before lunch. He followed, his cane thumping against the packed earth floor. You're terrifying, you know that? I've been called worse. I believe it. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, and Saren felt something settle in her chest. It wasn't friendship exactly. Wasn't even close to whatever marriage was supposed to be. But it was partnership, tentative and fragile but real. They were figuring out how to exist in the same space without making each other miserable. It was a start. That night, Saren woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up fast, her heart hammering, the sound coming from somewhere close. Through the connecting door, Rowan's room. She grabbed her robe and moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. Nothing. Then a low groan, muffled, the kind of sound someone makes when they're trying not to scream. Her hand hesitated on the handle. He told her to keep the door locked, to stay out of his space. But that sound, it wasn't anger or drunkenness. It was pain, raw and immediate. She turned the handle, unlocked on her side. She pushed it open. Rowan's room was dark except for the moonlight coming through the window. He was on the floor beside his bed, one hand gripping the bedpost, the other pressed against his thigh. The broken glass, a water tumbler, was scattered across the floor where it had fallen. His face was twisted, teeth clenched, sweat beading on his forehead despite the winter cold. Get out, he managed through gritted teeth. Not a chance. Saren crossed the room, careful of the glass, and knelt beside him. What happened? Leg cramp, bad one. Just leave me alone. But she could see it wasn't just a cramp. His left leg was twisted at an awkward angle, the muscle locked rigid beneath his sleeping pants. She'd seen her father deal with something similar after he'd injured his back, the way the muscles would seize up, trapping him in agony until they released. We need to straighten it out, she said. Don't touch me. Rowan, I've dealt with muscle cramps before. If we don't straighten it, it's going to get worse. Now shut up and let me help. She didn't wait for permission, just grabbed his leg, carefully but firmly, and started to extend it. He made a sound like a wounded animal, his hand shooting out to grip her wrist hard enough to bruise. Stop! Stop! Almost there. She kept the pressure steady, working against the locked muscle. Breathe through it. Come on. The muscle released with a sensation she could feel through her hands, and Rowan's entire body went slack. He slumped against the bedpost, breathing hard, his hand still wrapped around her wrist, but no longer crushing it. Better? She asked. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Saren sat back on her heels, looking at the broken glass, the sheen of sweat on his face, the way he was still trembling. How often does this happen? Often enough. That's not an answer. 2, 3 times a week, sometimes more if the weather's changing. The cold makes it worse. He released her wrist, looking away. You shouldn't have come in here and let you suffer alone. That's stupid. It's private. It's pain, and pain is easier to deal with when you're not alone. She stood, brushing off her robe. I'm going to get some warm water and towels. Don't move. She left before he could protest, making her way down to the kitchen in the dark. The house was silent, everyone asleep. She found towels and heated water on the stove that was still banked for the night, carrying everything back upstairs carefully. Rowan hadn't moved. He'd pulled himself partially onto the bed, sitting on the edge with his bad leg extended. In the moonlight, she could see the scars, thick, ropey tissue running up his calf and thigh where the bones had broken through the skin. She soaked a towel in the warm water and wrapped it around his leg without asking permission. He tensed, but didn't pull away. "The doctor can't do anything?" she asked. "He prescribed laudanum. I don't take it. Makes me fuzzy, useless. I'd rather deal with the pain and keep my mind clear." That's pride talking. Maybe, but it's my choice. She couldn't argue with that. She rewrapped the towel when it cooled, then did it again. Slowly, she felt the muscles under her hands start to relax, the tension easing. "My father used to get cramps like this," she said after a while, after he hurt his back. He'd wake up screaming sometimes. My mother would do this, warm compresses, gentle pressure. It helped. How'd he hurt his back? Fell off our roof trying to patch it during a storm. Landed wrong. He could still work, but some days the pain was so bad he couldn't get out of bed. Those were lean times. We'd go hungry while he recovered. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "That you had to grow up like that. It's not fair. Life's not fair. If it was, you wouldn't be dealing with this, and I wouldn't have had to marry a stranger to save my family." She met his eyes. "But we are, so we make the best of it." "You keep saying that. Make the best of it. Like it's easy." "It's not easy. It's necessary. There's a difference." She finished with the compresses and started cleaning up the broken glass, wrapping the pieces carefully in a towel. Rowan watched her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Why are you being kind to me?" he asked suddenly. "I've been nothing but difficult since you got here." Saren paused, considering the question. "Because underneath the difficult, I can see glimpses of someone decent. Someone who gives toy horses to scared kids and keeps his word even when it costs him. And because I've seen what happens when people give up on each other. It's ugly and it's wasteful and I'm tired of it. I haven't given up." "Haven't you? You locked yourself in your study for 2 years. You drove away anyone who tried to help. You decided that if you couldn't be who you were before, there was no point in being anyone at all. That sounds like giving up to me." He flinched like she'd hit him. "You don't understand." "You're right. I don't understand what it's like to lose your body's cooperation. But I understand loss. I understand waking up and wondering if there's any point to keep going. And I understand that the only thing that got me through those times was having someone who refused to let me quit. So consider this me refusing to let you quit. I didn't ask for that. No one ever does. But you're getting it anyway." She stood, taking the towel full of glass with her. "Can you get back into bed on your own, or do you need help?" "I can manage." "Then I'll see you at breakfast. And Rowan, lock your door if you really don't want me coming in, but if you leave it unlocked, I'm going to assume you don't actually mind the company." She left him there, returning to her own room and climbing back into bed. Her hands were still damp from the compresses, her wrist aching where he'd gripped it. But she felt something shift, another small crack in the walls between them. The next morning, she found him in the dining room at breakfast, earlier than usual. He'd shaved again, dressed carefully. His eyes found hers across the room. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for last night." "You're welcome. How's the leg?" "Sore but functional. The compresses helped." They ate in silence for a few minutes, but it was comfortable now, familiar. Then Rowan set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the ranch, about taking back authority. Brennan's getting the fence crew organized, but there's more that needs doing, a lot more. And I can't do it all from the house." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to get back out there, actually manage things, not just give orders from a distance. But that means riding, and I haven't been on a horse since the accident." Saren felt her pulse quicken. "Can you ride? With your legs the way they are?" "I don't know. The doctor says it's possible if I'm careful, use a mounting block, maybe modify the stirrups, but the thought of it—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I'm afraid." The admission cost him. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. Rowan Vance, who'd once tracked mountain lions alone and survived a winter in the high country, was afraid of getting on a horse. "That's understandable," she said carefully. "You fell. You almost died. Fear is normal. I used to ride like it was breathing. Now I can barely look at the stables without my hands shaking. It's pathetic. It's human. There's a difference. She leaned forward. But you know what else is human? Doing the thing that scares you anyway. Not because you're not afraid, but because the alternative is worse. And if I can't do it, if I get up there and freeze or worse, fall again, then we'll deal with it. But you won't know unless you try. She paused, an idea forming. Start small. Not a full ride, just getting on. See how it feels. I'll be there, and we'll take it slow. You've never even been on a horse. Then we'll figure it out together. Two people who don't know what they're doing is better than one person too scared to try. He almost smiled. That's terrible logic. It's the only logic I've got. What do you say? Rowan stared at his plate for a long moment. Then he nodded, sharp and decisive. This afternoon, before I lose my nerve. The stables were warm despite the cold outside, smelling of hay and horse and leather. Saren had never been this close to horses before. They were massive, powerful animals that made her feel small and breakable. But she kept her expression calm as Rowan led her down the center aisle, his cane tapping against the concrete. He stopped at a stall holding a dark brown mare with a white blaze on her face. The horse lifted her head when she saw him, ears pricked forward. This is Juniper, Rowan said softly. She was my horse. Before. She's beautiful. She's patient, steady. If I'm going to try this with any horse, it'll be her. He reached up to stroke her nose, and the mare leaned into his hand with obvious affection. Hey girl, remember me? Tom appeared from the tack room, surprised to see them. Mr. Vance, ma'am, can I help you with something? Saddle Juniper, Rowan said. Western saddle and bring the mounting block from the training ring. Tom's eyebrows went up, but he didn't question it, just nodded and got to work. Within minutes, Juniper was saddled and bridled, the mounting block positioned beside her. The mare stood perfectly still, like she understood something important was happening. Rowan stared at the horse for a long moment. His knuckles were white on the cane. You don't have to do this today, Saren said quietly. Yes, I do. If I don't try now, I never will. He handed her the cane and moved to the mounting block with slow, deliberate steps. His hands shook as he gripped the saddle horn. The stable had gone quiet. Tom and two other hands had stopped their work, watching. Saren wanted to tell them to leave, to give Rowan privacy, but she suspected he needed witnesses, needed people to see him try, to hold him accountable. He put his good leg in the stirrup first, testing his weight. Juniper didn't move, didn't even flick an ear. Then, with a visible effort, Rowan pulled himself up and swung his damaged leg over the saddle. For a moment, he just sat there, breathing hard. His face had gone pale, and Saren could see the pain in the way he held himself, the tension in every line of his body. But he was up. He was on the horse. How does it feel? She asked. Like I'm going to fall. His voice was tight. Like the ground's 1,000 feet down instead of 6. You're not going to fall. Juniper's got you, right, girl? The mare turned her head slightly, as if acknowledging the question. One of the hands, an older guy named Curtis, stepped forward. Want me to lead her around the ring, Mr. Vance? Just a slow walk? Rowan nodded, not trusting his voice. Curtis took Juniper's bridle and started walking, slow and steady. The mare followed without hesitation, her gait smooth and even. Rowan gripped the saddle horn with both hands, his body rigid. Saren walked alongside, staying close. Breathe, you're doing fine. I can't feel my hands. That's just adrenaline. Keep breathing, in and out. There you go. They made it once around the small training ring, then twice. By the third circuit, some of the rigidity had left Rowan's shoulders. His breathing was still fast, but more controlled. His hands had loosened their death grip on the saddle horn. How's the pain? Saren asked. Bad, but manageable. The saddle's putting pressure on the wrong spots, but I can adjust that. You want to stop? He looked at her, and something in his expression had changed. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Determination. Maybe even a hint of the man he'd been before. One more lap, he said. Then we'll call it. That one lap turned into 2 more. By the end, Rowan was sitting straighter, his hands resting on his thighs instead of gripping the horn. When Curtis finally brought Juniper to a stop, Rowan stayed in the saddle for a moment longer, his eyes closed. I did it, he said quietly. I'm on a horse, and I didn't fall apart. No, you didn't. Saren felt something warm expand in her chest. You did good, Rowan. Getting down was harder than getting up. His legs had stiffened during the ride, and the dismount was awkward, painful. He nearly fell, but Curtis and Tom were there to steady him. He stood on shaking legs, leaning heavily on the cane Saren handed him. That was just the beginning, he said, his voice rough. I need to be able to ride for hours, check the herds, manage the land. This was nothing. This was everything, Saren corrected. This was you deciding not to let fear win. Everything else builds from here. The hands were grinning now, genuine smiles. Curtis clapped Rowan on the shoulder, carefully, respectfully. Good to see you back in the saddle, boss. Real good. That night at dinner, Rowan was different. Still in pain, she could see it in the careful way he moved, the tightness around his eyes. But there was a light in him that hadn't been there before, a spark of something alive. I want to try again tomorrow, he said, longer this time. Maybe work up to riding without someone leading Juniper. Don't push too hard too fast, you'll set yourself back. I know my limits. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you spent 2 years doing nothing, and now you want to make up for lost time in a week. That's not knowing your limits. That's being reckless. He frowned. I need to get back to running the ranch properly. And you will. But if you hurt yourself trying to do too much too soon, you'll be back in that study drinking whiskey and hating the world. Is that what you want? Of course not. Then pace yourself, build up gradually, trust the process. He was quiet for a moment, turning his wine glass in slow circles. You sound like the physical therapist Eleanor hired. Right before I ran him off. What happened to him? He pushed me to do exercises that hurt, said pain was part of healing, that I needed to work through it. So I worked through it until something tore and I couldn't walk for 3 days. Then I told him to get out and never come back. Was he wrong? About what? About pain being part of healing. Not the tearing things kind of pain, but the discomfort of using muscles that have been dormant. There's a difference between hurt that helps and hurt that damages. Rowan considered that. Maybe. But how do you tell the difference? You listen to your body, and you accept that healing isn't linear. Some days will be better than others. Some days you'll take steps backward. That's normal. You seem to know a lot about this for someone who's never been injured. I know about struggling, and I know that the only way out is through, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She met his eyes. You're not in this alone anymore, Rowan. You've got people who want to see you succeed. Let us help. I'm not good at accepting help. I've noticed. But you're going to have to learn because I'm not going anywhere. Neither is Juniper or the ranch hands who were grinning like idiots when you got off that horse today. We're all invested now. Something softened in his expression. Thank you. For pushing me to try. For being there. You're welcome. Now eat your dinner before it gets cold. Betty made pot roast, and if you don't finish it, she'll be offended. They fell into a rhythm over the next 2 weeks. Mornings, Rowan worked with Brennan on ranch operations, slowly reclaiming his authority. The hands were responding, taking his orders seriously again. The north fence got fixed. Cattle were moved to better winter grazing. Small improvements, but visible ones. Afternoons, he rode. At first just in the training ring, then gradually extending to the nearby fields. Saren went with him on foot at first, then learned to ride herself on an older gelding named Copper. She was terrible at it, bouncing around like a sack of grain, but she kept trying. Rowan found her determination amusing, which she counted as a win. You're gripping too tight with your knees, he said one afternoon, watching her attempt to trot. Relax. Let your hips move with the horse. Easy for you to say. You grew up doing this. And you grew up setting trap lines in the mountains. We all have our skills. This just isn't yours. She shot him a glare, but there was no heat in it. They'd developed a kind of banter, trading barbs that lacked any real bite. It was comfortable, easy in a way she hadn't expected. Evenings were still dinner together, but now they talked about real things. The ranch, yes, but also their lives before. Rowan told her about growing up on the Vance land, about his parents who'd died when he was young, about learning to track from an old Blackfeet man who worked as a guide. Saren told him about her father's dreams of making it as a trapper, about her mother's quiet strength, about Danny's endless questions before he stopped talking. He's starting to come around, she said one night. Danny, He smiled yesterday when one of the barn cats had kittens. Didn't say anything, but he smiled. That's progress. He'll talk when he's ready. Can't force these things. I know, it's just hard watching him struggle. You're good with him. Patient. He's lucky to have you. The compliment caught her off guard. Rowan didn't give them often, which made them mean more when he did. I'm just doing what anyone would do. No. You're doing what a good person does. There's a difference. One afternoon in early March, when the snow was starting to melt and the air had lost some of its bitter edge, Rowan suggested they ride up to the ridge, the same ridge where he'd fallen 2 years ago. Are you sure? Saren asked. No, but I need to do it. Need to face it. His jaw was set in that stubborn way she'd come to recognize. Will you come with me? Of course. They rode out mid-morning, just the two of them. The trail was steep and icy in places, but Juniper and Copper handled it well. Rowan rode carefully, adjusting his position frequently to manage the pain, but he didn't complain. Didn't ask to turn back. The ridge was spectacular, a long spine of rock and pine that looked out over the valley and the ranch spread below. The mountains rose in the distance, still snow-covered, magnificent and indifferent. Rowan dismounted carefully and walked to the edge, looking down at the rocks below. This was where he'd fallen, where his life had split into before and after. I thought I was going to die, he said quietly, when I went over. There was this moment of absolute clarity where I knew I'd made a mistake, pushed too hard, and now I was going to pay for it. Then I hit the rocks and everything went white. Saren stood beside him, not touching, just present. But you didn't die. No. I woke up 2 days later half frozen, my legs destroyed, wondering why anyone had bothered to find me. Would have been easier if they'd just left me there. Easier for who? Everyone. Eleanor wouldn't be saddled with a broken nephew. The ranch hands wouldn't have to pretend to respect someone who can barely walk. You wouldn't have been forced into a marriage just to save your family. Stop. She turned to face him. You don't get to decide what's easier for other people. Eleanor wanted you alive, broken legs and all. The ranch hands are starting to respect you again because you're proving you still know what you're doing. And I wasn't forced. I made a choice. Maybe not a choice I wanted, but it was mine. It was a choice between marriage and watching your family die. That's not really a choice. Then what would you call what you did today? Coming up here to face the place that nearly killed you? Was that a choice, or were you forced? He was quiet for a moment. It was a choice. Exactly. We all make choices with the options we're given. Some are harder than others, but they're still choices, and they still matter. She looked out at the valley below. You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who survived something terrible and is fighting to build something worth living for. That's not easy. That's not weak. That's brave. I don't feel brave. I feel scared most of the time. Brave people are always scared. That's what makes it brave. If it wasn't hard, if you weren't afraid, it wouldn't count for anything. Rowan turned to look at her, really look at her. The wind caught her hair, pulling strands loose from her braid. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold and the climb. She looked strong, certain in a way he'd never felt about himself. When did you get so wise? He asked. I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. He laughed, actually laughed. The sound rusty but real. You're both, stubborn and wise and completely impossible. I'll take that as a compliment. They stood there together looking out at the mountains and the ranch below. The wind whipped around them, cold and harsh, but neither moved to leave. This place had broken him once, but being here now with Saren beside him, Rowan felt something shift. The fear was still there, but it didn't own him anymore. He'd come back. He'd faced it. And he was still standing. Thank you, he said, for coming up here with me, for pushing me to try again, for not letting me disappear into that study and drink myself to death. You're welcome, but you did the hard part. I just stood nearby and made unhelpful comments. Your comments were extremely helpful. Now I know you're lying. He smiled, and it felt natural, easy. We should head back. It'll be dark soon and the trail's dangerous in low light, says the man who used to survive winter alone in the mountains. That was before I realized how nice it is to have someone waiting for dinner. They rode back as the sun started to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. The descent was easier than the climb, and by the time they reached the stables, full dark had fallen. Tom took their horses, grinning at Rowan. Good ride, boss. Very good. Thanks, Tom. Anytime. Good to see you back out there. Walking to the house, Rowan moved slowly, his limp more pronounced after hours in the saddle. But there was something different about him, a lightness that hadn't been there before. Saren walked beside him, matching his pace without making it obvious. That hurt, didn't it? She said. The ride. Like hell, but it was worth it. You're going to be sore tomorrow. Probably, but I'll ride again anyway. Maybe check the south pasture, see how the cattle weathered the winter. One step at a time, remember? I remember. But I also remember what it feels like to be useful, to actually do something instead of hiding. I'm not giving that up again. They reached the house just as Eleanor was coming down the stairs. She stopped when she saw them, her sharp eyes taking in Rowan's flushed face, the way he was standing straighter despite the pain. You went up to the ridge, she said. It wasn't a question. I did. And I'm still here, still standing, ready to actually run this ranch instead of letting it fall apart around me. Eleanor's expression softened in a way Saren had never seen. It's about damn time. Welcome back, Rowan. That night at dinner, Eleanor joined them for the first time since the wedding. The conversation was lighter, almost cheerful. They talked about spring plans, about expanding the herd, about hiring new hands to replace the ones who'd left during the lean years. We'll need to rebuild trust with the buyers, Eleanor said. Prove we can deliver quality cattle on schedule. That means tighter management, better records. I can handle that, Rowan said. Brennan and I will work out a system. Weekly reports, regular inspections. The hands will grumble, but they'll adjust. And you're sure you can manage this? The riding, the oversight, all of it? I don't want you pushing too hard and ending up back where you started. I'm sure. It's not going to be easy, and some days will be worse than others. But I'm done hiding. Done pretending I'm helpless. He glanced at Saren. Someone recently reminded me that being afraid doesn't mean you stop trying. It just means you have to be brave enough to do it anyway. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Saren, assessing. She's been good for you. She's been impossible, stubborn, completely unwilling to let me wallow in self-pity. Like I said, good for you. After Eleanor left, Rowan and Saren lingered at the table. The house was quiet around them, settled into its evening rhythms. She approves of you, Rowan said. That's not easy to earn. I'm not trying to earn anything. I'm just trying to survive this arrangement without losing my mind. Is that all this is? Survival? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Saren thought about the past few weeks, the dinners, the writing lessons, the conversations that had gone from hostile to comfortable to something she couldn't quite name. She thought about standing on the ridge with him, watching him face his demons and come out stronger. I don't know what this is, she admitted, but it's more than just survival. It's something. Something, he smiled slightly, that's appropriately vague. I'm not good at this. At figuring out feelings or relationships or whatever you want to call it. I just know that I don't dread dinner anymore, that I actually look forward to our rides, that seeing you smile feels like a small victory. I could say the same. About you, I mean. About all of it. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. An offering, tentative. I'm glad Eleanor forced this. Glad you agreed. Even if it started as a transaction, it's become something more. Saren looked at his hand, calloused and scarred, hovering near hers. She could close the distance, could take his hand and see where that led, or she could pull back, keep the walls up, maintain the safety of emotional distance. She closed the distance. His hand was warm, solid. He laced his fingers through hers carefully, like she might pull away at any moment. This is new territory for both of us, he said quietly. Yeah, it is. We don't have to rush it. Can take our time, figure it out as we go. That sounds good. She squeezed his hand. But Rowan, whatever this becomes, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't go back to that study. Don't lock yourself away again. If things get hard, and they will, we face it together. No more hiding. He met her eyes, and she saw the promise forming before he spoke it. Together. No more hiding. They sat like that for a while longer, hands linked across the table, neither quite ready to let go. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the house was warm. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Saren felt like maybe she'd found something worth more than survival, something that might actually be called a home. The hand-holding became a regular thing, though neither of them acknowledged it outright. At dinner, their fingers would find each other across the table. Walking back from the stables, Rowan would offer his free hand and Saren would take it without comment. Small gestures that felt enormous, like they were learning a language neither had spoken before. Spring came slowly to the Montana mountains, the snow melting in patches to reveal mud and dead grass underneath. The ranch stirred to life, calves being born, fences needing repair after the winter damage, preparations for moving the herd to summer pasture. Rowan threw himself into the work with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, riding out every day despite the pain it cost him. "You're overdoing it," Saren told him one evening when he came back limping worse than usual, his face gray with exhaustion. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You can barely stand." "The work needs doing." "The work will still be there tomorrow. You're going to hurt yourself if you keep pushing like this." He shrugged off his coat, wincing as the movement pulled something in his back. "I've got 2 years to make up for. I can't afford to slow down. And if you break yourself permanently trying to make up for lost time, what then?" She moved to block his path to the stairs. "Rowan, I'm serious. You're running yourself into the ground." "What do you want me to do? Sit around and watch while the ranch falls apart again? I finally feel useful, finally feel like myself, and you want me to stop?" "I want you to pace yourself. There's a difference between working hard and working stupid." His eyes flashed. "I'm not being stupid. You rode for 8 hours today on legs that can barely handle 2. You haven't eaten since breakfast, and I'd bet money you're planning to work on those ledgers tonight instead of sleeping. That's not smart management. That's self-destruction with better PR." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're terrified that if you slow down, you'll slip back into who you were after the accident, so you're compensating by going too hard in the opposite direction. But that's not sustainable, Rowan. You're going to burn out." He stood there breathing hard, anger and frustration warring on his face. Then something crumpled. He sagged against the wall, one hand pressed to his lower back. "I can't go back," he said quietly, "to sitting in that study feeling useless. I can't do it again." "You won't, but you also can't run the ranch if you've crippled yourself trying to prove something." She moved closer, her voice gentling. "No one's asking you to be perfect. We just need you functional. That means rest, proper meals, and accepting that some days you won't be able to do as much as others. The men will think I'm weak." "The men already saw you get back on a horse after 2 years. They saw you ride up to the ridge where you nearly died. They think you're tough as hell. Taking a day off when your body needs it won't change that." He looked at her, and some of the defensive anger drained away. "When did you become the voice of reason?" "I've always been reasonable. You're just finally listening." She took his arm, feeling him lean more weight on her than he probably meant to. "Come on, Betty saved you dinner. You're going to eat it, then you're going to take a hot bath, then you're going to sleep. The ledgers can wait. You're bossy. You need bossing. Now move." She got him to the dining room, got food into him, and supervised while he soaked in the bath Betty had prepared. Through the closed door, she could hear him moving slowly, the small sounds of pain he couldn't quite suppress. It made her chest ache in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. When he emerged, wearing a robe and moving like an old man, she was waiting in his room with more of the warm compresses they'd used before. "Saren, you don't have to—" "Sit down and shut up." He sat, too tired to argue. She worked on his legs methodically, the way she'd learned over the past few weeks. The scars were familiar to her hands now, the patterns of damaged tissue and old breaks. She knew which spots made him tense, where to apply pressure and where to be gentle. "Thank you," he said after a while, "for this. For caring. Someone has to keep you from killing yourself with stubbornness. I mean it. I know I'm not easy. I know this arrangement wasn't what either of us wanted. But having you here, having someone who gives a damn, it matters." She finished wrapping the compress and sat back, looking at him. Really looking, the exhaustion carved into his face, the way pain had become so constant he barely registered it anymore. The vulnerability he only showed late at night when his defenses were worn down. "You matter," she said simply. "Not the ranch, not your ability to work 16-hour days, you. And I need you to take care of yourself because I'm not ready to lose this yet. Whatever this is." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm not either." They stayed like that, hands linked in the lamplight, until Rowan's eyes started to drift closed. Saren extracted herself gently and headed for the connecting door. "Saren?" She paused, looking back. Stay. Just until I fall asleep. Please. It should have felt strange, sitting in a chair beside his bed while he slept. They were married, but hadn't shared anything beyond dinners and conversations and those careful touches. This felt intimate in a different way, watching him vulnerable and unguarded, his breathing evening out into sleep. She stayed until she was sure he was deep under, then slipped back to her own room. But she left both connecting doors open, just in case. The next morning, Rowan actually slept past dawn. When he came down to breakfast, moving stiffly but less gray around the edges, he found Saren already eating with Danny. Her brother had started joining them for meals, still silent but present. Morning, Rowan said, pouring coffee. I slept through the sunrise. That's a first. Your body needed it. You'll work better for the rest. Danny pushed the wooden horse across the table, making quiet clip-clop sounds. He'd been doing that lately, playing near them, slowly coming back to life. Rowan watched him with something soft in his expression. Hey, Danny, you taking good care of that horse? Danny nodded solemnly, then made the horse rear up on its hind legs. Nice. You know, if you want, we could go see the real horses later. Maybe pet Juniper. She likes kids. Danny's eyes went wide. He looked at Saren, questioning. If you want to, she said. But you have to stay close and listen when Mr. Rowan tells you something, okay? Horses are big and you need to be careful. Another nod, this one eager. It was the most animated he'd been since they'd arrived. After breakfast, true to his word, Rowan took Danny to the stables. Saren came along, watching as Rowan showed her brother how to approach Juniper, how to hold his hand flat for the horse to sniff, where to pet without startling her. He was patient, gentle in a way that made Saren's heart do complicated things. She's soft, Danny whispered. The sound of his voice, small and rusty from disuse but real, made them both freeze. Saren felt tears prick her eyes. Rowan recovered first, keeping his tone casual. Yeah, she is. You should feel her nose, even softer. Danny giggled, actually giggled, when Juniper's breath tickled his palm. And just like that, he was talking again. Tentative at first, then in bursts, like he'd been storing up words for weeks and they were finally spilling out. Can I ride her? Not today, but maybe soon if you practice with a smaller horse first. There's a pony named Clover who's perfect for kids. Really? Can I meet her? Tomorrow, after you help your mama with her exercises. Deal? Deal. Danny ran off to tell his mother, leaving Rowan and Serene alone in the stable. She was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. He talked, she said. He actually talked. He did. Rowan pulled her into a hug without thinking about it, just offering comfort. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest. He's going to be okay, Saren. They both are. Because of you. Because you and Eleanor kept your word. Because you were brave enough to accept help when you needed it. That takes strength. They stood like that for a moment, her in his arms, both of them processing this small miracle. When she pulled back, Rowan kept one hand on her shoulder. I'm glad they're here, he said. Your family. They make the house feel more alive, and seeing you with them, it's good. You're good. So are you. You're better than you think you are. He kissed her forehead, spontaneous and gentle. It wasn't romantic exactly, more like a promise. Like he was trying to tell her something he didn't have words for yet. She leaned into it, accepting what he was offering. The next few weeks saw real change. Danny came fully back to himself, chattering nonstop and following Rowan around the ranch like a devoted shadow. Saren's mother grew stronger each day, able to walk without help, even starting to help Betty in the kitchen despite protests that she should rest. I can't just sit around, her mother said when Saren tried to make her slow down. I've been useless for too long. I need to feel like I'm earning my keep. You don't have to earn anything. Eleanor made a deal. I know what deal she made, but I still have pride, baby girl. Let me have that. So Saren let her help in the kitchen, let her mend clothes and organize linens, let her be useful. And watching her mother laugh with Betty over bread dough, seeing color in her cheeks and life in her eyes, Saren felt something loosen in her chest. The constant fear that had lived there for 2 years, the fear of loss, of failure, of not being enough, finally started to ease. She and Rowan continued their evening rides, exploring more of the ranch land. She was getting better at riding, less bouncing, and more actual control. He'd stopped leading her everywhere, letting her figure things out on her own with occasional corrections. "You're doing well," he said one evening as they walked the horses back. "Much better than when you started." "I had a good teacher, even if he is annoyingly perfectionistic." "I'm not perfectionistic. I just don't see the point in doing something if you're going to do it poorly." That's literally the definition of perfectionistic. He smiled, relaxed in a way she'd never seen in the early days. The pain was still there, would always be there, but he'd learned to work around it instead of letting it consume him. "Fine. I'm perfectionistic, but it served me well. Until it drives you into the ground. Balance, remember?" Yes, balance. You sound like a self-help book. I sound like someone trying to keep you alive and functional. There's a difference. They'd reached the stables. Tom took their horses, his knowing grin suggesting he'd noticed the way they stood close together, the casual touches, the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. Walking back to the house, Rowan took her hand. It was fully dark now, stars coming out overhead. The air still held winter's bite, but with spring's promise underneath. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous habit. About us. About this arrangement." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "It started as a transaction. My family's resources for your presence. But it's become more than that. At least for me." Saren's heart picked up speed. "For me too. I don't want to rush you. Don't want to assume anything. But I need you to know that when I look at you now, I don't see the desperate mountain girl Eleanor dragged in. I see someone strong and stubborn and impossibly kind. I see someone who saved my life just as much as I saved your family's." "Rowan, let me finish, please." He took both her hands. "I know we're already married on paper, but that was Eleanor's arrangement, not ours. I want to choose you, properly. I want this to be real if you'll have me. And I know I'm still broken, still dealing with pain and limitations, still figuring out who I am now. But I'm willing to try if you are." She looked up at him, at this man who'd been so bitter and closed off just months ago, who'd looked at her with contempt on their wedding night. He'd changed. They both had. Grown into something neither had expected. "I'm willing to try," she said. "But you need to understand something. I'm not easy either. I'm blunt and stubborn, and I don't know how to be soft. I don't know how to be the kind of wife you probably imagined having. I don't want soft. I want real. I want someone who'll call me on my bullshit and push me when I need pushing and stand beside me when things get hard. And that's you. That's exactly you." "Then yes, I choose you too. This mess, this arrangement, whatever it is, I want it to be real." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Can I kiss you? Properly, I mean, not just on the forehead." "You're asking permission now?" "I'm trying to be respectful. Rowan, shut up and kiss me." He did. And it wasn't perfect. Their noses bumped and the angle was slightly awkward, and they both laughed halfway through. But it was real. Honest. A choice they were both making, eyes open, knowing exactly what they were getting into. When they pulled apart, both breathing faster, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "So this is really happening," he said. "We're really doing this." "Seems like it. You having second thoughts already?" "Not even close. You?" "Ask me again when you're being impossible about the ledgers." He laughed, actually laughed, and kissed her again. Slower this time, more confident. Seren let herself sink into it, let herself feel the warmth of him, the solidness. This man who'd been a stranger, then an obstacle, then a partner, was becoming something more. Something that felt suspiciously like love, though neither of them had said the word yet. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they reached the stairs, Rowan paused. "Stay with me tonight?" he asked. Just to sleep. I like knowing you're close." "Your leg cramps?" "That, and I sleep better when you're there. Makes the nightmares less frequent." She hadn't known about nightmares. Another thing he'd kept hidden. "Okay, but I'm warning you, I steal blankets. I'll take my chances." That night they lay together in Rowan's bed, her back against his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist. It felt strange and right all at once. He was warm, solid, and she could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder blade. "Tell me about the nightmares," she said quietly. "They're always the same. I'm falling. I can see the rocks coming up, and I know I'm going to hit them, but I can't stop it. Then I wake up right before impact with my heart trying to pound out of my chest. How often? Few times a week. Less lately. Since when? Since you started leaving the doors open. Since I knew you were close by if I needed you. His arm tightened around her. You make me feel safe. I didn't think that was possible anymore. She laced her fingers through his. You make me feel like I don't have to carry everything alone, like I can breathe without constantly waiting for disaster. We're quite a pair. Two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole together. Maybe we don't need to be whole. Maybe we just need to be honest. I can do honest. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. I'm falling for you, completely, terrifyingly in love with you. And it scares the hell out of me because I don't know how to do this, how to be someone's husband for real instead of just on paper. But I want to learn. With you. Saren's breath caught. She turned in his arms so she could see his face. I love you too. I don't know when it happened. Somewhere between you being an asshole at our wedding and you teaching my brother about horses. But it's real. This is real. Yeah, it is. He kissed her again, deep and slow, and this time when his hands moved to her waist, when hers tangled in his hair, it felt like the beginning of something. Not just physical, but emotional. Acclaiming, mutual, and chosen. They made love carefully, navigating his pain and her inexperience, both of them learning as they went. It wasn't the smooth, perfect passion from stories. There were awkward moments, whispered instructions, laughter when something didn't work. But it was theirs. Real and messy and absolutely right. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Rowan's fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. No regrets? He asked. Not even one. You? Only that I wasted so much time being bitter when I could have been getting to know you. We got here eventually, that's what matters. He pulled her closer, and she felt him start to drift off, his breathing evening out. The nightmares didn't come that night. Neither of them woke until morning sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the room. The next few weeks were a revelation. They'd crossed some invisible line, moved from partners to something deeper. The ranch hands noticed. There were knowing looks and barely suppressed grins when Rowan and Saren rode out together, when they worked side by side in the barn, when their hands found each other without conscious thought. Eleanor noticed too, her sharp eyes missing nothing. One afternoon, she cornered Saren in the library. You've done well, Eleanor said without preamble. Better than I hoped, honestly. Rowan's himself again, better than himself, actually. He did the work, I just pushed him toward it. Don't sell yourself short. That boy was dying slowly, and you breathed life back into him. Eleanor paused, her expression softening in that rare way. And you love him. That wasn't part of the deal, but I'm glad for it. I do love him. Didn't plan on it, but here we are. Love rarely follows plans, usually shows up and wrecks everything you thought you knew. Eleanor moved to the window, looking out at the ranch. I want you to have this place someday. You and Rowan. It should go to people who'll care for it, who understand what it means. And you do. Both of you. Eleanor, I'm not dying tomorrow, but I'm not getting younger either, and I need to know the ranch will be in good hands. Your hands. His hands. Together. She turned back, her gaze sharp. You'll take it? When the time comes? Of course. If that's what you want. It's what I need. This land, it's all I have left of my family. I need it to survive, to thrive. You'll make sure of that. We will, I promise. That night at dinner, with Eleanor and Saren's mother and Danny all gathered around the table, it felt like family. Real family. The kind built from choice and circumstance and shared meals. Danny was telling an elaborate story about the barn cats, his hands waving for emphasis. Saren's mother was laughing, color high in her cheeks. Eleanor was pretending to be annoyed by the noise, but couldn't quite hide her smile. Rowan's hand found Saren's under the table, squeezing gently. She looked at him and saw her own wonder reflected back. They'd both been so alone before this. Her in poverty, him in pain, and now they had this. Family, home, each other. What are you thinking? He asked quietly. That I'm happy. Actually, genuinely happy. I don't think I've felt this way since before my father died. Me neither. Not since before the accident. Maybe not even then. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. Thank you. for saying yes to Eleanor, for giving this a chance, for choosing me. Thank you for being worth choosing. Later, in bed together, Rowan traced the line of her jaw with his fingers. I want to do this right, not the contract marriage Eleanor forced on us. Real vows. In front of everyone. Choose each other properly. We're already married. On paper, I want it to mean something. Want to stand in front of our family and the ranch hands and everyone who matters and tell them that you're mine and I'm yours because we decided it, not because Eleanor bribed us into it. Saren considered this. The first wedding had been cold, transactional, more contract signing than union. The idea of doing it again, but this time with love and intention, felt right. Okay, let's do it. A real wedding. Small, nothing fancy, just us and the people we care about. Perfect. He kissed her, slow and sweet. I love you, Saren Vance. I love you too, even when you're being impossible. Especially when I'm being impossible. Let's not get carried away. He laughed against her mouth, and she felt the sound resonate through her chest. This was what she'd been missing her whole life. Not just safety or security, but this. Connection. Partnership. Someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway. They planned the wedding for late spring, when the wildflowers would be blooming and the weather would be warm enough to hold it outside. Saren's mother helped with preparations, her capable hands making everything beautiful without being fussy. Danny appointed himself in charge of decorations and took the job very seriously, gathering wildflowers and arranging them in jars. The ceremony itself was simple, just family, the ranch hands, and Justice Miller again, this time performing a wedding that actually felt like one. Saren wore a new dress, pale yellow like sunshine, that her mother had sewn from fabric Eleanor provided. Rowan wore his best suit, standing straight despite the cane he still needed. But the biggest difference was their faces. Where the first wedding had shown contempt and resignation, this one showed joy, love, choice. Do you, Rowan James Vance, take Saren Ann Hale to be your wife? Justice Miller asked. I do. Absolutely. Completely. Without reservation, I do. And do you, Saren Ann Hale, take Rowan James Vance to be your husband? I do. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you, again, husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, and this time, maybe actually do it. The crowd laughed. Rowan pulled Saren close and kissed her properly, thoroughly, not caring who was watching. When they broke apart, both breathless, the ranch hands were cheering. About damn time, Brennan called out, grinning. Thought you two were going to dance around it forever. The celebration that followed was loud and joyful. Betty had made enough food to feed an army. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing on the lawn, spring flowers scattered everywhere. Danny danced with his mother, giggling when she spun him around. Eleanor watched it all with satisfaction, her legacy secure in capable hands. As the sun set, painting everything gold, Rowan pulled Saren away from the crowd. They walked to the ridge where he'd almost died, where he'd faced his fear and started healing. The view was spectacular. The ranch spread below, the mountains rising beyond, everything touched with that perfect spring light. This is where it all changed, he said, where I decided to stop giving up. And it's because you pushed me to come here, to face it. Everything good in my life now traces back to that moment. You would have gotten there eventually, maybe, but it would have taken longer and hurt more. You made it possible. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. I know this started wrong. I know I was cruel to you when we first met. But somehow, impossibly, you saw past that. Saw something worth saving. And you saved me, Saren, completely. We saved each other. I was dying in that cabin just as surely as you were dying in your study. We both needed this. Needed each other. He kissed her as the sun sank below the mountains, as the first stars came out overhead. And in that moment, standing on the ridge where he'd broken and begun to heal, where they'd both learned what it meant to choose each other, everything felt exactly right. They'd started as strangers forced together by circumstance and desperation. They'd become partners through necessity and stubbornness. And now, finally, they were what they should have been all along. Two people who loved each other, flaws and fears and all. Who chose each other every day, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Below them, the ranch glowed with lamplight and laughter. their family, their home, their future. All of it hard-won and real and theirs. Ready to go back? Saren asked. In a minute. I want to stay here with you a little longer, just us and the mountains and this perfect moment. So they stayed, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars come out one by one over the land that was now truly theirs. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to build together, one day at a time, with honesty and work and love. The seasons turned, and with them came the rhythm of ranch life that Saren had never imagined she'd know. Summer brought long days of moving cattle to high pasture, branding calves, mending endless miles of fence. Rowan worked alongside his men now, not behind a desk, and while the pain never left him completely, he'd learned to work with it instead of against it. Some days were worse than others, days when he could barely walk, when even mounting Juniper took 20 minutes and left him gray-faced. But he showed up anyway, and the men respected him for it. Saren found her own place in the operation. She wasn't born to ranching the way Rowan had been, but she learned fast. Learned to read the cattle, to spot sickness before it spread, to manage the books with an eye for both profit and sustainability. Eleanor taught her the business side, how to negotiate with buyers, how to build relationships that would last beyond a single season. "You're a natural," Eleanor said one afternoon, reviewing the ledgers Saren had balanced. "Better at this than I ever was, honestly. You see patterns I miss. I grew up counting every penny. When you've lived on nothing, you learn to make the numbers work. It's more than that. You understand people, know how to read what they need, what they'll pay for. That's rare." Serene thought about the desperate cabin, about calculating how many days they could stretch a loaf of bread, about the constant math of survival. Desperation teaches you things. Not all of them are bad. By fall, Danny had started school in town, riding in with Tom 3 times a week. He was thriving, making friends, learning to read properly, coming home with his head full of facts about geography and mathematics. He still loved the horses best, though, spending every free moment in the stables with the pony Clover that had become his special charge. "Can I have my own horse someday?" he asked Rowan one evening. "A real one, not just borrowing Clover? When you're old enough to handle the responsibility? Absolutely. But that means more than just riding. It means feeding, grooming, mucking stalls, all the parts that aren't fun. I can do that. I already help with Clover. Then we'll see. Keep proving you're serious, and maybe for your birthday next year." Danny threw his arms around Rowan's waist, the gesture spontaneous and full of joy. Rowan hugged him back, and Saren saw something in her husband's face, a contentment that went bone deep. This makeshift family they'd built meant something to him, meant everything. Winter came hard that year, early snows that trapped them inside for days at a time. But the house was warm, the pantry full, and they weathered it together. Saren's mother had fully recovered, helping run the household with Betty, the 2 women forming an unlikely friendship. On the worst storm days, they'd all gather in the main room: Eleanor, Saren's mother, Danny, Rowan, and Saren, playing cards or reading aloud or just sitting in comfortable silence while the wind howled outside. "This is what I always wanted," Saren's mother said one night, watching Danny play checkers with Rowan. "Family around me, everyone safe and fed, warm. I never thought I'd have it again after your father died." "Neither did I, Mama." "You did good, baby girl, taking Eleanor's offer. I know it was hard marrying a stranger, but look at what you built." Saren looked at Rowan, at the way he was letting Danny win without making it obvious, at the firelight catching in his dark hair. "We built it together. He was just as trapped as I was. We both needed saving. That's how the best partnerships work. 2 people pulling each other up instead of one carrying the other." It was true. They'd learned to lean on each other, to share the weight instead of bearing it alone. When Rowan had bad pain days, Saren managed the ranch operations without complaint. When she got overwhelmed by the business side, he'd sit with her and work through the numbers until they made sense. They fought sometimes, both of them too stubborn to back down easily, but they fought fair and always came back together. One particularly brutal argument in January nearly broke them. Rowan had pushed himself too hard during a blizzard, trying to rescue cattle that had gotten separated from the herd. He'd been out for 12 hours in sub-zero temperatures and came back half frozen, barely able to stand. Saren had been terrified, then furious. "You could have died out there," she shouted, watching him shiver despite the blankets piled on him. "For what? A few head of cattle? Those cattle are our livelihood. I couldn't just leave them. And if you'd frozen to death, what then? Was your pride worth making me a widow? I wasn't going to freeze to death. I know this land, know how to survive. You know how to be reckless. You know how to push yourself beyond any reasonable limit because you're still trying to prove you're not broken. But you are broken, Rowan. Your legs are damaged and they're never going to be what they were. And risking your life to pretend otherwise is the stupidest thing you could possibly do. The words hung between them, harsh and true. Rowan's face went hard, closed off in a way it hadn't been in months. Get out, he said quietly. No, I said get out. I don't need you standing here telling me I'm broken. I'm aware, thanks. I'm not leaving. You can be mad at me all you want, but I'm not walking away from this. They'd stared at each other, both breathing hard, both too angry and scared to bend. Finally, Rowan had turned his face away. I had to try, he said, his voice rough. Those men were counting on me. I couldn't just hide inside while they risked their lives. No one expected you to go out there. Brennan had it under control. But I'm supposed to be the one in control. I'm supposed to lead. You do lead every single day, but leadership doesn't mean doing everything yourself. It means knowing when to delegate, when to trust your people. And it means staying alive so you can actually run this ranch instead of dying for it. The fight had ended with both of them exhausted, Rowan's fever spiking from the exposure. Saren had nursed him through 3 days of chills and delirium, barely sleeping, terrified she'd lose him to pneumonia the way they'd almost lost her mother. When he finally recovered, weak but alive, she'd climbed into bed beside him and cried. I'm sorry, he'd said, holding her as she shook. You're right. I was being stupid, trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. I won't do it again. Promise me. Actually promise. I promise. I'll be smarter about my limitations. I'll trust the men to handle things I can't. I'll stop trying to be who I was before and accept who I am now. Who you are now is enough. Better than enough. I need you to believe that. I'm trying. Some days are harder than others. I know, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. That's what I'm here for. The incident had scared them both, but it also solidified something. They weren't just partners in love or business. They were partners in survival, in building a life that could weather the storms. And they came out of it stronger, more honest about limitations and needs. Spring returned, bringing new calves and new challenges. Eleanor's health started to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of age. She moved slower, tired more easily, started talking about the future in concrete terms. I want to transfer the ranch to you legally, she told Rowan and Saren one evening. Make it official. You've proven you can run it, proven you care about it. It should be yours. Eleanor, you're not dying tomorrow, Rowan protested. No, but I'm not getting younger either, and I want this settled while I still have all my faculties. The lawyers are drawing up papers. You'll take over full ownership by summer. Saren felt the weight of it settle over her. This land, this legacy, this responsibility. It was overwhelming and right all at once. We'll take care of it, she promised. Honor what you've built here. I know you will. That's why I'm giving it to you. Eleanor's expression softened. You've given me something too, you know, both of you. You gave me back my nephew, gave me the family I thought I'd lost. That's worth more than any amount of land. The papers were signed in June, witnessed by Justice Miller and half the ranch hands. The Vance Ranch officially belonged to Rowan and Saren now, though Eleanor would live there for as long as she wanted, still offering advice and oversight when needed. How does it feel? Saren asked Rowan that night, standing on the porch and looking out at land that was now truly theirs. Terrifying, exciting, like everything's finally fallen into place but could still fall apart at any moment. That's just life. Nothing's guaranteed. We just do our best and hope it's enough. It's been enough so far, more than enough. He pulled her close, his arms around her waist. I never thought I'd have this. A wife I love, a ranch I can actually run, a future that doesn't look like endless pain and bitterness. You gave me that. We gave it to each other. I was just as lost before you, just as stuck. She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest. We saved each other. That's how it works when it's real. That summer brought news that changed everything again. Saren discovered she was pregnant, and the revelation sent both of them into a spiral of joy and terror. They'd been careful, not planning for children yet, but biology had its own timeline.
Are you happy about it?
Rowan asked, his hand on her still flat stomach. Scared out of my mind. But yeah, happy. You? Same. Terrified. Thrilled. Wondering how we're going to manage a baby and a ranch and everything else. But we'll figure it out. We always do. The pregnancy was hard. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel impossible. Saren had to step back from some of the ranch work, which frustrated her to no end. But Rowan and Brennan picked up the slack, and her mother fussed over her with the kind of attention Saren had never received before. You're eating for two now. You need to rest more. Mama, I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still function. Barely. I see you trying to hide how tired you are. Let people help you, baby girl. That's what family is for. So Sareen let herself be helped, let herself be cared for in ways that felt foreign, but good. And as her belly grew through the fall and into winter, as the baby became real and present, she found herself thinking about the future in ways she never had before. This child would grow up with everything she hadn't had: security, warmth, family who loved them. They'd never know hunger or cold or the desperate mathematics of survival. What kind of parent do you think you'll be? She asked Rowan one night, his hand resting on her stomach where the baby was kicking. Probably overprotective. Definitely worried about everything. Hopefully present and honest and willing to admit when I'm wrong. He paused, feeling another kick. What about you? I want to be the kind of mother mine was, strong even when things are falling apart. But I also want to give them what I didn't have. Choices. Options. The freedom to become whoever they're meant to be instead of whoever survival forces them to be. They'll have that. They'll have everything. We'll make sure of it. The baby came in February during a snowstorm that buried the ranch in 3 feet of powder. Dr. Harrison made it just in time, and after 12 hours of labor that left Saren exhausted and overwhelmed, they had a daughter. Small and red-faced and perfect, with Rowan's dark hair and Saren's determined expression. She's beautiful, Rowan said, holding her with shaking hands. So beautiful. She's a fighter, came into the world screaming. Saren watched her husband cradle their daughter, saw the wonder and fear and love on his face. What should we name her? They discussed names for months without deciding. Now, looking at this tiny person who'd arrived during a blizzard, demanding attention and care, the answer felt obvious. Hope, Rowan said. Her name is Hope, because that's what she represents, what you gave me, what we built together. Hope Vance, I like it. Danny was immediately smitten with his niece, appointed himself her protector and constant companion. Saren's mother cried happy tears holding her granddaughter. Eleanor declared her the most beautiful baby ever born, bias be damned. The first few months were brutal. Sleepless nights, constant worry, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. But they managed it together, trading off night feedings, supporting each other through the exhaustion and fear. Rowan was a natural father, patient and gentle even when Hope screamed for hours. Saren learned to trust her instincts, to accept that she wouldn't be perfect, but she'd be enough. One spring morning, when Hope was 6 months old and starting to smile at everyone, Saren found Eleanor on the porch. The older woman looked frail, smaller than she'd been even 6 months ago, but her eyes were still sharp. Thank you, Eleanor said without preamble. For everything. For saving Rowan. For running this ranch. For giving me the chance to meet my great niece before I go. You're not going anywhere anytime soon. We both know that's not true. I can feel it, the way things are slowing down, winding down. But I'm not afraid. I've seen what I needed to see. This ranch in good hands. Rowan happy. A new generation starting. That's enough. Saren felt tears prick her eyes. You saved us too, you know, me and my family. We'd be dead if you hadn't made that offer. I made a business proposition. You're the one who turned it into something real. Don't sell yourself short. Eleanor patted her hand. You're stronger than you think, Saren Vance. Always have been. That's why this worked. You and Rowan, you matched each other. 2 survivors who refused to give up. Eleanor passed quietly in her sleep 3 weeks later, during the first real heat of summer. They buried her on the ranch, under a pine tree, with a view of the mountains she'd loved. The funeral was simple, attended by everyone who'd worked for her over the years, everyone whose lives she'd touched. She gave me everything, Rowan said, standing at the grave. This land, this life, you. I wouldn't be here without her interference. She gave us a chance. We did the rest. Yeah, we did. They stood together, Hope sleeping in Saren's arms, and watched the sun set over Eleanor's final resting place. The loss was real, sharp, but softened by the knowledge that she'd lived to see what she wanted, her legacy secured, her family whole. The years that followed brought growth and change. The ranch prospered under their management, growing from a struggling operation to one of the most respected in 3 counties. They hired more hands, expanded the herd, built new barns and outbuildings. Danny grew into a capable young man, learning the business from the ground up, talking about maybe taking over someday. Hope became a wild, fearless child who loved the horses as much as her uncle did, learning to ride almost before she could walk. Saren's mother lived long enough to see Hope's 5th birthday, to teach her granddaughter to bake bread and mend clothes and all the practical skills that had kept them alive in the lean years. When she passed, it was peacefully, surrounded by family, her last words a whispered thank you to Saren for giving her these final good years. Everyone I started with is gone now, Saren said to Rowan after the funeral. My father, Eleanor, Mama, we're the older generation now. It's just us. It's not just us. We've got Danny, Hope, the people who work here, the community we've built. That's family, too. I know. It's just strange. I spent so many years trying to keep my family alive, and now they're gone anyway. Makes me wonder what it was all for. It was for this, for the life you gave them at the end. Your mother didn't die starving in a freezing cabin. She died warm and fed and loved, knowing her children were safe. That matters. That's everything. He was right. The struggle had been worth it, not because it had prevented death. Nothing could do that. But because it had given the people she loved dignity and comfort in their final years. That was the best anyone could hope for. One evening in late fall, when the mountains were turning gold and red, Rowan found Saren in the library going through old ledgers. She did this sometimes, looking back at where they'd started, tracing the path that had brought them here. What are you thinking about? He asked. About that first night, when Eleanor brought me here and you threw the glass at the fireplace. I was so scared, so sure I'd made a terrible mistake. You had. I was awful to you. You were hurt and angry. You had reasons. She closed the ledger, turning to face him. But look at us now. We built something neither of us expected. Something real. The best things are usually the ones we don't plan for. He sat beside her, his leg aching from a long day of work, but manageable. The pain was always there, would always be there, but it didn't define him anymore. I think about the man I was before you came, before Eleanor forced my hand. I was dying, Saren. Maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered. And you dragged me back to life whether I wanted it or not. You did the same for me. Gave me and my family a future we never would have had otherwise. So we saved each other, turned a transaction into a partnership into love. That's not a bad outcome for 2 desperate people trying to survive. Not bad at all. They sat together as the light faded, comfortable in the silence, in the life they'd built from desperation and stubbornness and choice. Outside, they could hear Hope laughing as Danny taught her to lasso fence posts. The ranch hummed with activity, productive and thriving. This was what success looked like, Saren realized. Not perfection. There would always be hard days, bad seasons, pain that couldn't be escaped. But a life built on honest foundations, on people who chose each other every day despite the difficulties, on work that mattered and love that endured. What do you think happens next? Rowan asked. For us? For the ranch? For everything? More of this. We keep building, keep working, keep choosing each other. We raise Hope to be strong and kind. We help Danny find his path. We run this ranch the best we can and hope it's enough. Sounds simple when you say it like that. The best things usually are. We make it complicated by overthinking, by trying to control outcomes we can't control. But really, it's just about showing up, doing the work, being honest. That's all anyone can do. When did you get so philosophical? When I realized we'd actually made it, that we weren't just surviving anymore, we were living, building something that would outlast us. She took his hand. We did it, Rowan. Everything we set out to do, everything we were forced into doing, we turned it into something worth having. We did. And I'd do it all again. Every hard moment, every fight, every terrified step. Because it led here. To you, to Hope, to this life. Even marrying a desperate mountain girl you'd never met? especially that. Best decision Eleanor ever made for me, even if I hated her for it at the time. They sat there as night fell completely, the house warm around them, the people they loved safe and fed and clothes. And Saren thought about the frozen cabin, about her mother's gray face and Danny's hollow eyes, about the moment she'd agreed to marry a stranger to save them. She thought about Rowan in his study, bitter and broken, throwing glasses at the fireplace. Two desperate people, forced together by circumstance, who'd somehow found salvation in each other. That was the thing about survival, she realized. It wasn't about avoiding pain or hardship or loss. Those things came regardless, brutal and inevitable. Survival was about what you built in spite of them, about finding the people who would stand with you when everything else fell apart. About choosing to keep going even when giving up would be easier. She and Rowan had both been broken when they started. Maybe they still were, in some ways. His legs would never fully heal, her childhood scars of poverty would never completely fade. But they'd learned to build around the broken places, to create something stable despite the cracks in the foundation. "I love you," she said, the words easier now than they'd been the first time. "I love this life we've built. I love who we've become together. I love you too. Always will." He kissed her, slow and certain. "Thank you for not giving up on me. On us. Thank you for being worth the fight." Hope's laughter rang out from somewhere in the house, followed by Danny's deeper voice telling her it was time for bed. The sounds of family, of home, of a future that had seemed impossible just a few years ago. This was the real victory, Saren understood. Not wealth or success or even survival, though those mattered. The real victory was love chosen daily, family built from scraps and determination, a home carved out of necessity that had become something irreplaceable. They'd started with nothing but desperation and a contract. They'd built an empire, not the kind measured in land or cattle or money, though they had those too. The kind measured in morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, in hands linked across dinner tables, in children raised with love and security, in showing up for each other, day after day, year after year, through pain and fear and all the thousand small moments that made a life. That was the real lesson, the one Saren would carry forever and teach her daughter someday. That you didn't need perfect circumstances or perfect people to build something beautiful. You just needed the courage to try, the stubbornness to persist, and someone willing to meet you halfway. She'd found that in Rowan. He'd found it in her. And together, they'd turned survival into something that looked a lot like happiness. The mountains stood eternal outside their windows, indifferent and magnificent. The ranch would endure beyond them, past to Hope and her children and the generations that followed. But this moment, this life, this love, that was theirs. Hard-won and real, and absolutely worth every frozen, desperate step that had led them here. And that, Saren thought, was more than enough.